to the point where some people were estimating a single percentage point chance of victory for Trump. That seems to have shifted slightly this weekend, where Biden still has like a 10-point lead in a lot of places, but other places are seeming a little bit more pitched, including some of the key battleground states. Just before we went on air, actually, we were talking about Florida, where a bunch of Latino voters may be coming out to vote for Trump. Jamarl, there's a lot of conversation we can have there, and I'm sure we'll have even more of it tomorrow.
Yeah, we're having a ton before the show.
Too, but Jamarl, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, we're having a ton before the show. That's a good question, man. Yeah. I mean, that is the question. What is going to happen in that race tomorrow? And, I think Trump is going to get crushed. And crushed might be too strong. I think that it's going to be closer than I think some people are looking at it for. I wouldn't be shocked if Trump wins. I think that's the difference where I am. It's like, it wouldn't throw me off my horse if Trump wins. By the same token, I think he's going to lose. And I think Biden is going to take the Senate. I think Mitch McConnell is preparing and has been preparing for a Senate where he's not in power. I think the Republicans know it. They've been talking about it amongst themselves. And regardless of what Trump is vocally saying, I think he's going to lose. Now, the catch becomes, what happens? And I think what you're asking me is, what happens on election day? And does Trump claim it? Because there's been reports out that Trump is going to claim a win. Now, understand, if he claims a win, the whole point of that is to push that to the courts. I win. Somebody says, no, you didn't. Who adjudicates? Okay, we need to go to the court. Now, does Amy Coney Barrett sits out? That's the question. That's the question. Because if she doesn't, oh my God. What do you think, Shane? Does she sit out?
That's what makes us so damn controversial. I'll just walk down that option tree for a second. If she does sit out, then what do you have? You have 8 people on the court. You have effectively the potential for a split, which would mean no resolution of the crisis. I think, forget who was saying it before we started the show, when you guys were saying, I believe it was one of you guys. If nobody claims this tomorrow, it's going to be easier. If somebody comes in and claims this tomorrow, unless there's also a landslide victory, it's going to be messy. So if you get, a 62% majority victory for Biden or for Trump, for that matter, and one of them claims it, then you're going to be okay. That's a pretty darn big margin in terms of the electoral college there. If that doesn't happen, if it's a lot more split, and with the USPS service slowing down over recent days, and with just general questions about, voter fraud and what that looks like, it's going to be split. And so if Trump claims it, and it appears to many outside observers that he either doesn't have it or that the majority isn't large enough for him to actually call it, that's going to get super messy. You know what I mean, Jamarl.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I apologize. I thought the mic was off. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Super messy is an understatement. I mean, we don't have a leadership issue in this country. We never have a leadership issue in this country. Almost reflexively, it's almost like in the DNA of the typical candidates in the United States to shake the person's hand. This guy won. I'm leaving, and I'm gonna, get a beer. Even when the person loses, George Bush Sr., I'm gonna shake this guy's hand. We're gonna get a beer. This guy won. Trump, if he calls an early win like the reports are claiming he is, I mean, this could be calamity. But see, part of me feels like this is boisterousness. Part of me feels like there's no way he's going to do that. That's what I feel like, but I only feel like that because nobody else has done it going back prior. But look, just, there's always a first. And from the standpoint of making room in the space, in the politics space or the space politic, Trump does. So I don't know. I'm curious. I'm fascinated to see what's going to happen, and it's all going to happen tomorrow night. And I'm excited.
It will. Yeah, it will. And in related news, next headline here, a federal judge is ordering the USPS to mandate some of the extraordinary measures that the agency announced earlier in the week. Specifically, Judge Emmett Sullivan is requiring the USPS to use its express mail network to expedite the delivery of ballots today through Wednesday. The USPS must also affix a legible postmark to every ballot to mark the date those ballots are collected. These requirements come as new court filings show that for the third day in a row, the U.S. Postal Service moved fewer ballots on time in critical battleground states than it did in the previous day. So I believe this actually started last Wednesday, where for every day, every consecutive day, you've had a slight reduction in efficiency, where it went from like 96%, for instance, to 94%, for instance, to 92%. The idea being ballots are taking longer to deliver. You're getting errors thrown in there. So the efficiency rating is going down. And now federal judge Emmett Sullivan is trying to prevent that from taking place over the next couple of days, which will, of course, be fairly crucial. Just, kind of important for the USPS. A little bit of significance in terms of how well they fulfill their duty. Anyway, this is also all smacking. I just want to pause on this one for a second, because we've been talking about, with Louis DeJoy, Postmaster General, rolling stuff back and reducing the budget and threatening to do more, and the fear of privatization. We've been talking in a broad sense about the USPS and the troubles that it's been facing for like months now, including we've had great guests. Oh my gosh, I feel so ashamed right now. I'm forgetting his name, but great guest on from the New York Metro Area Postal Union talking about this.
Chuck Zlatkin.
Tomorrow.
Chuck Zlatkin,
exactly.
You know what's wild about
so
this?
Much.
My wife is probably sitting somewhere like, oh my God, he got a name. I am horrible with names. I've been like calling some Skittles and stuff like that. I am horrible with names. And the fact that I can remember Chuck's name. Chuck, you left an impression, but my man.
He did. All those good conversations. And it's an interesting last name too. Maybe that's, I could see that going either way. I could see you forgetting it a little bit more easily, but maybe it just stuck out like that. Anyway, other headlines. Let's get through them. A gun battle is underway, last I checked, inside Kabul University. This is as we were going live this morning. Multiple attackers stormed the sprawling campus in the capital of Afghanistan, forcing students to flee the campus, officials said. At least 6 people have been wounded there after gunfire erupted during a joint Afghan-Iranian book fair. So a book fair at the university there. Interior Ministry spokesman Tariq Arian said the fighting was ongoing as security forces surrounded the campus. Meanwhile, Typhoon Goni this weekend hit more than 2 million people in the Philippines on Sunday, leaving villages buried and tens of thousands huddling in evacuation centers. Several bridges were destroyed, including one that split in half after a river swelled. That's according to local reports. Other routes were impassable because of debris, floods, and landslides. Damage could take days to assess. And in Tanzania, the leader of the main opposition party has been arrested along with other major members of that party after calling last week's election fraudulent and asking for the public to protest the results of that election. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I know everybody's attention is on election day today. I just want to throw this one in for good measure. It's about time that we freed Julian Assange, that the United States stopped trying to get him extradited, sort of eased up on the pressure there. It wouldn't make any difference at this point, but it would be a good moral thing to do for Trump to just, stop that stuff today. In fact, Tarif, if you're listening, and if you call in, as you often do, I just, we're on the same page, man. I think we both agree it would be a very good moral move at this point for Trump to stop pursuing Julian Assange. That's a long-term travesty. I don't know why that comes to mind, but just trying to put things in light. Jamarl?
Well, we have Taylor Hudak on, and she is an advocate.
Absolutely true. No, but I was thinking this over the weekend. I was almost meditating on it, and I don't even know why. But yeah, it's one of those important things to sort of focus on and remind yourself of over time. Anyway, should be an interesting day tomorrow. Not only are we doing our show, but special coverage. We're going to be doing special coverage during the evening too. I'm not sure how much we're talking about that, but it'll be happening. And,
it will be tomorrow's going to be a busy day, man. Unfortunately, I am not going to be able to join you guys at the studio because I am, disgusting and infectious. And however, I will be here manning the shop. And I'm still going to be here from 6 to 8, and I forget the hours and everything else. But It's going to be a fascinating night. I'm so excited. It's a weird. It's this odd thing of being in two minds. Part of me is depressed, and part of me is excited. It's like it's an election, so I'm excited because it's an election. By the same token, it's Biden versus Trump. And so it's like, oh, it hurts. It's a strange headspace.
That sounds like it. Yeah, that sounds a little bit emotionally traumatizing. I feel like
What is that traumatizing?
it's true. Yeah, well, no, it's true. I mean, I feel like Biden and Trump, you see them fighting, and you do get that a little bit of pleasure just to see people you don't particularly like attacking each other. But at the same time, we're what they're ultimately fighting over. And it's not a good situation to have those people fighting over the control of your life and the nukes, just the nukes. Yeah, man.
You know what
it's going
like?
to be busy.
It's as if at one point
it doesn't end tomorrow. Go for it. It doesn't end tomorrow. That's my only thing. Is it's going to keep on going. So we're going to have to keep dealing with it. The whole country will. Anyway, tomorrow.
Well, it's almost like some point in that distant future, in that distant past, somebody said, "All right, we're going to make a decision on who chooses, and we're going to find the most honest men, and we're going to choose the two honest men, and those two honest men are going to fight over who runs all of this, everything." And then over time, somewhere along the way, that one honest man said, "You know what? They think I'm honest. I can, just change the facts a little bit, just a tiny bit, and I can move it just a little bit." And as he nudge it and nudge it and nudge it over the course of X amount of time, these guys aren't all that honest anymore. And these guys are getting what they can get out of it. And at some point, the public needs to realize that. And I don't know, I think what it is, the public doesn't know what to do. The public wants something different. My brother-in-law was here last night, and he was like, "Those guys take an oath to do X, Y, Z," and I'm sitting there laughing at him. Like, so what? So what? But look how cynical that is. But I'm right? Like, there's no God, there's no nothing to stop that person from doing any of that stuff. Nothing. And unfortunately, that's...
Maybe there's us. No, I don't think we're God. I don't think we have the capacities to intervene in, crucial moments. But we do occasionally. You know what I mean? That's what this whole election is about. Then I know what your response is going to be. It's like, when these are our choices, do we really have a choice? Is there really any, there's no, what's the competition over, frankly? It's over control of the country. But at a certain point, who is in the running?
Right.
That's all that actually matters here. Anyway, we've got to go into a break here. I was thinking of going into a longer point, but we don't have the time for it. We're going to be back on the other side of this break with Jamarl's monologue, going into depth on some key issue. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in 1 minute.
Fault Lines.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
You check top.
We couldn't put it better ourselves. Tune in to Political Misfits on Mondays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Miss the Press, our weekly takedown of Sunday's toothless news talk shows.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host, Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station from D.C. If you guys are in the area, you can catch us at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, whatever content you're consuming this on, like this video, share this content. Also, you can reach us, don't be shy, a chat, a tweet, and of course, a phone call. 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. So I was debating on what to discuss this morning. And this morning has been a bit technically challenging, to put it mildly, in such a weird way. But like I told Shane, I'm excited. It's election tomorrow. And this is what we do. We do the news. And so it's kind of like a holiday. I am, what's the word for it? Depressed by the two candidates. It's sapping, it drives the energy out of you to some degree to end up with a Biden and a Trump when you're faced with the challenges to which you're faced. And yet, I do the news. And we're having an election. And something will change in the context of even if what they're going to spend money on versus what they don't spend money on. How much they're going to give in taxes versus how much they don't give in taxes. Whether they focus on a climate policy versus not focus on a climate policy. Those things will be decided tomorrow, and I suppose you could say they will be decided now. Biden has been giving his closing statements over the weekend. Let's play a clip of Trump's closing statement. Andre, let's play the clip.
Rounding the turn. I say it drives them crazy. It's rounding the turn because all they want to do, you turn in the news, COVID, 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 COVID. Would like to talk about COVID, and then next year, here's what happens. November 4th, you won't hear too much about it. You won't hear too much about it. Don't tell anybody, but let me wait till a little bit after the election.
Closing statement, fire Fauci. 230,000 dead. And fire Fauci. Fire the guy that was right. And Trump has been hitting that guy. That guy's been wrong. That guy's been wrong a lot. And that's what he's going into the presidential election with. It's astonishing. In any other normal circumstance, both people who are running in this race will be the easiest to beat candidate in the history of candidates that either person will put up. I can't believe the way Donald Trump has run this race. I can't even believe in the way Donald Trump has handled COVID-19. I can't believe how ineffective and inert Joe Biden has been in this campaign. By the same token, it's a rational thing to be that way when Trump is your opposition. And you don't have to push it. And the public isn't making you push it because the public isn't demanding anything of you. The public just says, save us. And Joe Biden puts on some glasses and says, I'm Joe Biden. I'm here for the job. I'm phenomenally curious about what the job is that Joe Biden is going to do. I have no clue because people never made a demand of Joe Biden. And Joe Biden never spearheaded his campaign on anything. Think about what I'm saying for the moment and look around at your world with everything that's going on. I would love for people to have the context where each and every individual in this country could call up immediately FDR during the Great Depression. And they think of the bread lines and they think of the people, in the street, destitute. And they think of the people being thrown out of their homes. And they hear FDR saying, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. And I, FDR, am going to go into that government and I'm going to save the world. I'm going to put the world back on its axis. And as if we were being attacked by aliens, everything in his powers was marshaled to deal with the Great Depression. So much so that the courts were striking this stuff down. It's like, you can't do that. Pew. The president is not a god. Pew. Strike down. And what did he do? I'm going to pack the court. I'm going to add members to the court because the court is striking my stuff down. And I'm trying to get this stuff done for the American public. Think about what that looks like. What does the public see in that moment? It's phenomenal if you think about it. It's a president, a man who's taken the job and has taken the job seriously and has basically said, I am the representative of America. And I am going to push through the stuff. I am going to browbeat Congress, and I'm going to push the stuff for America. And I'm going to use the public as my linchpin to push it through. And the court says, you can't do that. And he says, well, fine. There's nothing in Congress or nothing in the Constitution. I can't add people to the court. And the court says, whoa. The court, whoa. You can't do that. And he says, yes, I can. I'm president of the United States. Congress shivers. Why? He's trying to terrify the court. He's trying to threaten the court. Leave my stuff alone. I'm trying to save the world. I'm trying to save America. But that's what he was trying to do. That's a man that was motivated, bent to task. Now, yes, there's some right-wingers and some troopers that said, hey, it was the war that saved America from the Great Depression. And yes, you're right. But that man was motivated, and that man did everything that was in his power to get that stuff accomplished. We have a crisis that goes beyond that. It goes beyond the Great Depression. You have your bread lines or your food lines. The only difference is people are in cars now. It's COVID. You have hundreds of thousands of people still dying because of a virus. You have all of these people out of work. You have all of that stuff that was taking place back then, with a bonus of COVID. The response, from the standpoint of both candidates, America seemed to be an afterthought. Go back and look at the beauty pageants. Go back and look at the way Joe Biden is running the race. Joe Biden is running the race entirely relative to Trump. You don't believe me? Donald Trump comes out and says Joe Biden is run by the loony left. He's run by the radical left. And what does Joe Biden do? On the DNC convention, he brings up Republicans, trots them out. Yes, he wants to pull Republicans into the party because those are the policies that he wants to do anyway. He's more aligned with those guys. He wants to marginalize the left. But he also wants people to see, well, here are the Republicans, and Donald Trump says we're run by the left. It's negation. It's just the issue of negation. Donald Trump comes out. He's gonna, be soft on crime. He gets Kamala Harris. He gets a black person. Clyburn comes out and says, you colored people need to shut up about saying that you're not getting something for, whatever. But he also gets tough on crime stuff and cop stuff. And he recedes back into the woodwork. My point is, Biden is not putting forth an affirmative case in regards to, I'm going to do something. He's negating. That's all he needs to do. But think about what's going on. He's negating in the context of a situation where, from a historical standpoint, presidents have used this as moments to knock it out of the park. Philosophically, yes. Ethically, yes. But also because it was needed. I don't push for these policies because I think it's great for the policy. I push for the policy because the policies are necessary. And you shouldn't even have to honestly at this point make an argument for Medicare for all in the context of a pandemic. I'm making the point that if there's historical knowledge and you look back at that and what he was willing to do, moving heaven and earth, compared to what these two people are doing now, you got to ask yourself, what have we lost and why have we lost it? Is it really a representative government? If they're not willing to represent what the overwhelming majority of your party backs, and I'm talking about multiple policies, is it a representative government if you're in a pandemic and neither candidate seem all that interested in the country itself to which they're running for? Yes, tomorrow's the election day. Neither one of these candidates are going to give you what you need. Shane, tomorrow's election day, man. My brother's, my wife's brother was like, so what should I do? And he does, and I was like, it's not a you thing. It's not an individual thing. At a certain point, your decision space as an individual is constrained. The issue becomes the public itself making a demand. And by demand, I mean the public pulling itself out of the political space and saying, I'm done. I'm not playing the charade anymore. We want X and Y, and be very clear in the demand and the policy that they want. That's what you do. But unfortunately, that's not it. That's not going to be done tomorrow. So, what do you think about the upcoming election?
I think it's a load of fun. There's that phrase, it'll get worse before it gets better. I empathize mostly with those first three words, it'll get worse. It just seems like politics, the world, our civilization, whichever way you want to look at it, various things are crumbling. So I'm not feeling terribly optimistic about sort of material things. As we were going out, I think it was on Thursday because I was still getting flack from people on Friday. I was talking about freedom in like our closing segment and like intellectual freedom and where you can find freedom in this world. And I forget exactly what I said, and it doesn't really matter, but it's just this idea that you can't actually find it in politics. You can't find freedom or light or wisdom, at least not in modern politics, but arguably in politics in general. Like you need something deeper, something outside of that. And I guess I'm worried that for a lot of people, it seems like politics has become the deeper thing that they sort of, like, whether it's entertainment or whether it's their vocation or whether it's some way to express what they want the world to look like. Politics has become the lens and the frame for their aspirations. And that seems like a bad process. That seems like a fundamentally sort of dangerous process, because I guess I want to sort of play the devil's advocate with that position for a second. You do need politics. You need to work out the dynamics of power and to fundamentally push for improving things materially in the world with other people. Like that's core to it as well. But it seems like the way that people get engaged these days is on the lightest possible levels, with the highest degree of emotion and vitriol levied against their supposed political opponents. Usually people they don't know, have never met, only have heard things about occasionally. That seems to be where a lot of people are. And it seems like for a lot of folks, like if you're just living your day-to-day, working a job, the idea is, okay, I'm going to go out and do something. I'm going to go and get involved in politics. That's a dumb way to put it, but there is something to it. And if that is your like escape valve for your life, if that is your way of proving to yourself that you're a good person and that you're doing the right things in the world, and it seems like you're fundamentally delimiting yourself to this horrible, constant attrition warfare on the human spirit. I mean, I'm rambling, man, and admittedly, this might not make perfect sense, but there's some people to which it might make sense, for whom it may speak volumes. Even I don't know. It applies to me. So I'm doing this job. I'm looking into the news, trying to build out these larger stories, and then on the weekends, I'm hanging out with my family and I'm trying to learn how to make sauerkraut, and that feels fulfilling. Both of those parts together feel fulfilling, but you need the at-home stuff where you're just producing things. And I wish that politics were a little, in a weird way, I wish that I thought that was something that Donald Trump or Joe Biden were doing instead of constantly campaigning.
The thing is, Shane, that behavior where you said the mean-spiritedness and everything else, it's incentivized. I mean, I guess what I'm saying, think of it this way. At one point, it wasn't that way. Then somebody said, I'm going to push the envelope just a little bit because I can get an advantage out of it. And the public isn't necessarily accustomed to it and everything else. And it goes. And it's shocking. But they get an advantage out of it. And it becomes normal. And do you do that for X amount of, 100, 200 years? And you sit here now. This is what we get. Like, it's the logic of it. That's the kind of point that I'm making here. The logic of that stuff is the stuff that matters sometimes more. Because as it perpetuates through time, if human beings are flushing and using a system, let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and our guest for this segment and the next, Daniel Lazar. Daniel is an independent journalist and the author of several books, including The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, and America's Undeclared War. Daniel, thank you for being with us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm just fine. How are you?
Good. So let's start off here. Let's actually start off on the other side of the Atlantic. Jeremy Corbyn, going into the weekend, was suspended from the Labour Party. That was big news late last week. I'm just going to hand it over to you. What happened, and how did we get here? Daniel.
Well, there are curious parallels with Russiagate here in the U.S., where I believe Russiagate was much ado about close to zero, but yet it dominated the news cycle for 2.5 or 3 years. I mean, you open the paper up, you turn on CNN, all you heard was collusion. And in Britain, something very similar happened. A kind of an orchestrated hysteria over the question of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. The Labour Party attracted hundreds of thousands of new members in around 2014, I believe it was, and they voted in Jeremy Corbyn, a left-winger. And when hundreds of thousands of people, join the party, some portion of them will say things that are a little bit flaky. I mean, we all say things that are flaky at times. But you had Corbyn's enemies, including, by the way, some aided by the Israeli embassy, combing through Facebook posts to supporters looking for various transgressions, and they found a few statements that I would classify as merely silly, ill-informed, intemperate, etc. The kinds of things that you or I say, several times a week. But these things were blown up and made into a cause célèbre by the right wing of the Labour Party, where Corbyn was accused of being either countenancing anti-Semitic or being soft anti-Semitism, or being soft on anti-Semitism, and was eventually driven out of the party. And I've looked at these cases of alleged anti-Semitism, and they don't amount to a hill of beans. I mean, as I said before, some of them are kind of silly, some are kind of intemperate. One woman named Jackie Walker, who was actually of Jewish and Afro-Caribbean extraction, posted something about Jews being involved in the slave trade in the 18th century. It was a passing observation she made on her Facebook page. It was historically ill-informed, but nothing more than that. So she was driven out of the party. And anyone who tried to defend her was driven out of the party. And anyone who said this problem was being overblown was driven out, and eventually Corbyn himself was driven out. Now the Labour Party is being destroyed. It's being destroyed. It's hard to see how we can carry on in the midst of an intra-party civil war. I don't see how it can carry on much longer. And once it emerges from this debacle, if it emerges, it'll be a shell of its former self. So I see this as an operation by British media, right-wing Labourites, etc., to essentially cut the Labour Party off at the knees. And it looks like it might be successful.
It was Daniel, you're 1,000% right. Because that's what happened here in the United States with Russiagate. I mean, Russiagate was everywhere. Like the level of hysteria was astonishing. And if you're outside the country, you look at it like, what is going on in the United States? Well, the hysteria around that also, it was being used as a weapon. And it was being used as a weapon in a way that was awkward for Corbyn to deal with. And he accepted the premise. Meaning right off that he accepted the premise like of anti-Semitism as labor. And so like every other day he's dealing with questions about, hey, are you an anti-Semite? Hey, and all of this, every last bit of this, if we're being bluntly honest, the only thing that really gets to the nub of why they consider Jeremy Corbyn an anti-Semite is because he thinks Palestinians are human beings and shouldn't be put in open-air ghettos. And because of that, they go after him. What do you think? I mean, am I being too bombastic with that particular statement? I mean, they use it as a weapon.
I agree totally. I must say, Corbyn did not handle it well. He was unprepared, and he just didn't know what he was getting into. He was unprepared for the buzzsaw he was walking into, and didn't handle it well. He found himself on the defensive at every stage of the game. So that's the story. But
by the way, they hit him with it like they hit Hillary with the Comey emails. If you remember, the Archbishop at the last minute comes out and says something like Corbyn is anti-Semite or something, and it was like a day or two before the election, in the same way that the Comey email came out, like a day, like just before the election, and you know. But I'm sorry. Go ahead. Please finish.
It's very similar, and as I said, Corbyn didn't handle it very well. But there's no doubt his real transgression was deviating from this policy of 110% support for Israel, and that was his sin, and that's the sin he paid for. And just as I know, and America is such a screwed up country that the dissidence comes from the right rather than from the left. At least Corbyn's a left winger, whereas in America, Trump's whole only sin was deviating from the foreign policy establishment orthodoxy on Russia. He wanted a rapprochement with Russia at a time when the U.S. when the foreign policy establishment was clamoring for a showdown. Russia had just delivered two smart slaps to the face of U.S. foreign policy. He had taken over the Crimea, and he had interceded in Syria in behalf of the beleaguered Bashar al-Assad government. I think he had good reasons to do both. I'm not a Putinite. I'm not a Putin supporter. I'm not one of these people who are in love with the guy. And I don't go weak in the knees when I see his picture on the TV. But he is. I believe he had good realpolitik reasons for doing both those actions. And the U.S. and the U.S. was dealt a harsh blow, and it was furious. It was going to mobilize its forces, and then into the middle of this stepped Donald Trump, not knowing half what he was doing, and expressed deviation from the new orthodoxy, for which he paid for 2.5 years of a nonstop media barrage accusing him of collusion with the Kremlin. It's astonishing.
That's what we're dealing with now. I mean, just to respond briefly, you brought up Syria, you brought up Ukraine. It's weird because Trump, in some sense, was echoing Obama's talking points from years earlier when Obama was trying to reconcile or get onto good terms, whatever, with Putin. But I mean, in Syria and Ukraine, if you look at it plainly, what happened there is the United States backed one attempted coup and one successful coup. The successful coup being Ukraine, the attempted coup, of course, being Syria, resulting in the war that we still see going on today. It's weird that Trump came into this, just looking at it from the States' perspective, and then I want to get back to the UK. It's weird that Trump came into this with a sort of, common sense in a weird way, sort of middle America outlook on a lot of this stuff when it comes to foreign policy, the economy, when it comes to the major planks of, the policies that ultimately were what got him elected. That's what it takes, I guess. I mean, you're saying that it comes from the right. I think that that's in large part because Trump was responding to the Obama administration, part of the Democratic Party. I don't know. I would need to think about it more, but I don't want to make too much out of the left-right distinction in the United States, because I think you could see with Bernie Sanders some similar and overlapping criticisms of the status quo in America's political system. With the UK, though, I want to come back to this with you. What do you think? You're talking about right-wing reformers within the Labour Party movement doing all of this stuff. What are their motivations and connections? Who do you? I mean, I'm guessing you're talking about Keir Starmer, other folks associated with his wing. What are they pushing for?
Well,
Daniel?
it's the same forces we see in the United States. It was the Tony Blair wing of the Labour Party, who was closely allied with the Hillary Clinton wing of the Democratic Party, and they both went to war together in Iraq and Afghanistan, and so this wing, which sees itself as the responsible labor wing, which has renounced socialism and wants to integrate itself thoroughly into the national security state, saw both men, for sort of equal and opposite reasons, as transgressors from outside this national security magic circle. So as a consequence, they moved to expel them. And so Corbyn, who's by the way, he's a very nice guy. His district is Finsbury Park in London. It actually has a sizable Jewish community, and he is beloved by the Jews in his district. I mean, he's the nicest guy in the world. There's a guy whose weekend pastime is making homemade jam and preserves. I mean, he's a really nice guy, a really gentle guy, a really well-meaning guy, and a guy who's beloved and doesn't have an anti-Semitic bone in his body. But he came from outside this magic circle. And because he said things that the people inside this circle didn't like, they moved to drive him out as hard and fast as they could. And that's what we see here, just as we saw in an eerie parallel way with Trump.
Daniel, we're going to take a break here. We're joined by Daniel Lazar. He's an independent journalist and the author of several books. We'll be back with him on the other side of this break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan. Joining us is Daniel Lazar, an independent journalist and author of several books, including The Frozen Republic, Velvet Coup, and America's Undeclared War. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. Could I just add something to what I was saying before the break?
Go for it.
I mean, Jeremy Corbyn is accused of anti-Semitism by the Tony Blair wing of the Labour Party. And when Blair left, stepped down from the leadership of the British government, he formed a private institute. It was first called the Tony Blair Faith Foundation. Now it's called the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. And who is a major funder of that institute? Saudi Arabia, one of perhaps the most anti-Semitic society on the face of the earth. So the Blairites use anti-Semitism to wallop Jeremy Corbyn, who doesn't have an anti-Semitic bone in his body, while at the same time pocketing millions from the most anti-Semitic country on earth. This, to me, I mean, talk about hypocrisy. This, to me, is astonishing. But no one in the media dares point this out.
Well, speaking of what we were talking about before, it's fair to say that a trauma, or let's say a disaster happening to a person or a group of people, may explain why they act out. It doesn't necessarily justify it, however. Israel has this scenario where they often conflate Judaism with Israeli, meaning statehood stuff. You would have somebody who would criticize Israel because of what they're doing as a state. And you would have others call that anti-Semitism in the party itself. It's astonishing. I was watching them as it was taking place. They were trying to stop Corbyn from saying anything about Israel. And you had the Blairites who hated his guts, who just wanted him out. And these two forces just merged. In fact, you had one woman screaming at him, calling him an effing anti-Semite, what is a Hodge, in the floor of Parliament. And then, of course, what happens? Media writes down. Everybody says she says he's an effing anti-Semite. And she was real passionate about it. Like missing that this is political theater of sorts. They have nothing to point to from the standpoint of Corbyn being that way. How do you push back? How do you deal with that? Like when you say he dealt with it wrong, because it's like you're in a political situation and I'm saying, you're an anti-Semite, you're an anti-Semite, you're an anti-Semite. And then the media says, are you anti-Semite? It's a beat your wife question. It's like the very fact that they're asking you if you beat your wife, you're in the midst of a conversation about them beating your wife. How do you deal with that? How should he have done with that in a way where it wouldn't necessarily, I mean, there's no, you're trying to look for the best angle that gives you the worst, the least hit. How should he have dealt with that?
Well, you're right. There's not an easy answer to that question because the problem is the Labor Party is its close association with Zionism goes back decades. Okay, and so therefore it has this kind of relationship with Israel sort of woven into its DNA, and it's difficult for Corbyn to break with that without sort of going deep into Labor Party ideology and essentially creating an ideological revolution, which requires completely different orientation to Israel. But you're quite right. The important thing is to maintain a sharp distinction between Jews or Judaism on one hand and Israel or Zionism on the other hand, because they are not the same thing. I mean, it was not the Zionists who perished in the Holocaust. It was the Jews. The Zionists were in Palestine by this point. And they actually took a somewhat ambiguous attitude to the Allied war effort. Remember, they were a colony of Britain. They wanted to throw the British out, and there was actually an extremist wing of the right wing Zionism, which actually talked about entering into a military alliance with the Nazis. This is in 1939, 1940. Against the British. And actually, amazingly enough, an Israeli prime minister named Israel Shamir actually emerged out of that far right-wing movement. So you can't you can't willy-nilly equate Jews with Israel because they're different any more than you can willy-nilly equate Americans with the United States of America. Because the people in the state are distinct and their interests are not necessarily the same.
Yeah, but Netanyahu does it all the time. And because Netanyahu does it all the time, when it is attacked, when any of that stuff is pushed, or by members of the Labour Party, say for example, somebody from the Labour Party doesn't recognize that difference between those things in the same way that Netanyahu doesn't want you to recognize the difference. Because when he speaks, he's like, I want to speak for all Jews across America. Across the world. Well, when somebody goes after Netanyahu because he's doing something horrible, and Netanyahu himself is conflating Judaism with Israel. Do you see what I mean? Like the conflation here that's taking place is honestly to God from Netanyahu himself. And because of he's going with this conflation of a Jewish state, then the attacks is almost like by definition any attack on me or any attack on what we're doing to some degree is an attack on Jews themselves. It's utterly disgusting in the way the conflation takes place. But that conflation allows also the attack on Corbyn and them trying to get him to write the language for what they consider to be anti-Semitism in a way that completely neuters him. Meaning, if you go out and say, I support Palestinians, it's like, oh, that guy's anti-Semitic. It's almost that tight.
Yes, it's extremely screwed up. But let me just say that the people who should be most offended by this conflation are sincere opponents of anti-Semitism. Because when anti-Semitism is used, when the charge is used as this kind of like political football, what happens is that the term becomes cheapened, and people stop believing in it. So if someone cries out anti-Semite, if someone accuses someone else of being an anti-Semite, the other person will simply wave his hand in dismissal and say like, no, that's what you guys always say. The same thing I must say happens with black activists when they overuse the term racism. I mean, eventually racism loses meaning as well through sheer overuse. Now, there's actually an Israeli dissident who says that Israel is now the most anti-Semitic country on earth. And what he means by that is that Netanyahu welcomes a string of anti-Semitic political leaders, most notably Viktor Orban, the strongman president of Hungary, who visited Israel in, I think, 2018. Netanyahu sprinkles Orban with a little bit of holy water, absolves him from the sin of anti-Semitism, and then, Orban then, thanks him, goes back home, and is free to engage in the same policies as always with Israeli approval and cover. Even worse, two of Netanyahu's top PR advisors actually advised Orban in a political campaign he ran in 2014, in which he won because he demonized George Soros, who's a Hungarian Jew, on classic anti-Semitic grounds. So in other words, Netanyahu's advisors, and Netanyahu had actually recommended these advisors to Orban, the Netanyahu team advised Orban on how to run an anti-Semitic campaign against George Soros. And this is the guy who then cries anti-Semitism whenever it serves his political self-interest. And any sincere opponent of anti-Semitism has got to be appalled by this, because it completely destroys the use of the term and opens the door wide to real anti-Semites. So I mean,
you're diluting the meanings of the terms you're using. Yeah, and I completely hear what you're saying, Daniel. There was actually something you were saying a couple of minutes ago that I wanted to go back to. You were talking about Jeremy Corbyn responding to this, what he would have needed to do. I think Jamarl was asking, what can he practically do with the wife beater comments about anti-Semitism, where as soon as people start pushing you on it, as soon as they're choosing that for your frame of reference, they've sort of already won. What you said was that he would need to instigate a sort of genuine ideological revolution within the labor movement. That sounds like something that you've thought about a bit, and you might have some more ideas on. So I'm just curious, for an American audience, for a global audience, for a UK audience, where would you see that going, Daniel?
Well, he has to separate this. He has to break down this idea of Zionism, and separate and analyze what it really means, and separate Zionism from the Jews, and point out that that the two are not the same, and that it's perfectly fine to criticize Zionism, as it's perfectly fine to criticize British colonialism, that doesn't in any way imply a racist attack on the British themselves. But you've got to point out that Zionism's interests are not the same as the interests of the Jews. I mean, most Jews don't live in Israel. Most Jews live in, countries like the U.S., Canada, Britain, etc. They're very well integrated into their societies. They believe in democracy. They believe in anti-racism because that's the only way they can possibly survive in these countries. And these are all values that are increasingly on the defensive in Israel itself. I mean, as an American Jew, I went to the West Bank in 2012 to the city of Hebron, and I came away shocked because to see Jews behaving like white racists in Mississippi circa 1965 as they shoved Palestinians off the sidewalk and swaggered around like they were members of the White Citizens Council. This is something I never saw among American Jews, and I was astonished. And I think of myself as a worldly, well-informed guy, but even I was taken aback. So it's not in the interest of American Jews or British Jews or Canadian Jews or Russian Jews to engage with this kind of racism. It's not in their interest because it's a danger to them, a grave danger. Of course, the more these forces are activated in the U.S., the more Jews will be threatened. So therefore, Israeli racism, and it really is quite real. If you've ever seen it up close, it's real. Israeli racism is a danger, an immediate danger to American Jews, British Jews, French Jews, etc. So that's where the two groups are parting ways: the Zionists on one hand and the Jews on the other hand.
It is a shocking
interesting
thing.
the abuse of.
Oh, go ahead, Shane.
It is.
Well, no, I was just saying the racism is a shocking thing. That's all. It's like the modern day, and I don't think they see the parallel. The reason why I always make this kind of affiliation between African Americans and the plight of Palestinians is because to me those things are very similar. You have a situation where one group walks around with complete domination of the other group from the standpoint of law and everything else. Let's do this. Let's close out. Daniel, I really do appreciate you coming on to the show. Where can people find your work? I think Daniel's on. Okay, so I just give it myself. Independent journalist and author of several books, including The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, and America's Undeclared War. Daniel Lazar. And you guys are listening to Fault Lines on Thomas and Stranahan. Be back.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to the headlines in the news. Today is the last day of campaigning before our voters head to the ballot box tomorrow to choose America's presidential candidate. Early voting has dominated the election cycle with well over half of all expected votes cast already. Both Trump and Biden are campaigning today in Pennsylvania, with Biden in western Pennsylvania and Kamala Harris campaigning in eastern Pennsylvania. Trump will be holding rallies in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. A federal judge is ordering the UPS to mandate some of the, quote, extraordinary measures, unquote, the agency announced earlier this week. Specifically, the judge, Emmett Sullivan, is requiring the USPS to use its express mail network to expedite the delivery of ballots today through Wednesday. The United States Postal Service must also affix a legible postmark to every ballot to mark the date that the ballot was collected. The targeted requirement comes as the court filings show that, for the third day in a row, the U.S. Postal Service moved fewer ballots on time in critical battleground states than it did in the previous day. A gun battle is underway in Kabul University after multiple attackers stormed the sprawling campus in Afghan capital, forcing students to flee the campus. Officials said at least 6 people have been wounded in Kabul, Afghanistan, after gunfire erupted in the capital at the university was hosting a joint Afghan-Iranian book fair. The Interior Ministry spokesperson, Tari Aryan, said the fighting was ongoing as security forces surrounded the campus. Wow, interesting. I hope everyone is okay. Typhoon Guni hit more than 2 million people in the Philippines on Sunday, leaving villages buried and tens of thousands huddling in evacuation centers. Several bridges were destroyed, including one that split in half after a river swelled, according to local reports. Other routes were impassable because of the debris, floods, and landslides. Damages could take days to assess. The leader of Tanzania's main opposition party has been arrested along with the major members after calling last week's election fraudulent and asking for members of the protests to protest the results of the election. Interesting. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Wow, I couldn't imagine that. That's such a strange thing, at least from the standpoint of us, where, the number of people who will be arrested and everything else. One thing, Shane, Trump seems to be signaling that when this administration, if he wins, he's going to fire a lot of people. People are going to lose some jobs. What do you think about that? And better yet, let's play the clip. We played this clip earlier in the monologue. Let's play it one more time. That's if you guys have it.
With Fauci.
The Fauci clip.
Rounding I say it drives them crazy. It's rounding the turn. Because all they want to do, you turn in the news, COVID. Would like to talk about COVID, and then next year, here's what happens, November 4th. You won't hear too much about it. Don't tell anybody, but let me wait till a little bit after the election.
Now, he's talking about firing Fauci. And not just Fauci, a bunch of other people in the administration if Donald Trump exceeds. Now, the wild part about this is yesterday, Friday, I believe, we were going through the numbers, and the numbers were astonishing. New cases reported, more than 88,000 new COVID cases, the biggest one-day record, and this was on Friday. Meanwhile, El Paso, Texas, shut down all non-essential services. The United States hit 9 million total cases. And to put this in perspective, the last time we had 1 million cases was 14 days prior. So within 14 days, we've added 8 million cases. There's Utah, again, I made the point, is rationing care. Boris Johnson, across the pond, has come out. These guys are shutting down. And France, Macron, he came out and gave a statement of shutting down France also. Like, what on earth is going on? I wish we would have taken this seriously. It's almost like reality is regarding your society and saying, all right, here's the problem, deal with it. And our society says, okay, we're going to deal with it. And you have some people say, I want to do nightclubs. You have some people in America, I have my individual liberties. I don't want to wear that mask. That mask makes me look fat. And it's like, what? The mask makes me look fat. And then somebody else says, I can't breathe in that mask. I can't breathe in that mask. I can't get oxygen. And it was like, what are you talking about? What do you mean you can't get it? And you have all of this nonsense. It's just, dude, just wear the mask. It's such a small price to pay to try to deal with something that's killing a lot of people. Even if you don't believe you're going to be one of the people, even if you don't believe you're going to give it to anybody else, even if you did get it, so what? And it's like, it's your society almost like being given a test. And it's saying, and this is what we do with this. Now, the thing is, the catch is, with leadership, and the way that you always say, Shane, it will be different. And I'm sorry, the buck stops at the top with this one. Because, let me ask you this. If Donald Trump's people came out early on, if Donald Trump came out early on and said, I need to get this economy back up and running, so I want people to wear a mask, do you think he would be having protests, mass protests? Shane?
Do I think you... What do you mean by mass protests? What time frame are you talking about? Are you talking about the right wing pushing back?
Yeah. Do you think there'll be, if Trump told his people, hey, I need you guys to wear masks, do you think people will be coming out saying, no, screw that. I don't want to wear a mask. I want my individual liberties. Or do you think people would be like, Trump says wear a mask, I'm wearing a mask?
I don't think people would have cared, but you've got to remember that originally Fauci said you shouldn't wear a mask. You've got to remember that the World Health Organization, Fauci, Robert Redfield.
You always go back to that, Shane, but you're months,
I know.
You're months ahead. You're months in the rears.
Of course. No, of course. But here's the point: is that I can defend Trump, I can attack Trump, whatever. I can. You always talk about how morality is subjective, or that's a point that you bring up frequently. Well, the framing around a story is pretty subjective too, and it's weird. This is just a general point in politics. Usually, you're sort of compromising over what frame you're going to use, where there's a sort of accepted frame that society uses, and then different little subcultures will use their own frames for ideas, and those frames will admit different facts. That whole thing. With this story. It does, the framing does matter, because if you're going back to the initial stages of his response, the things that he was saying during the debate about getting attacked for wanting to shut the country down, all that stuff, that's totally true. He totally was. The people who are on the other side of that, the people who are on the other side of whether or not you should wear masks, the World Health Organization saying that COVID is not airborne. It's not just saying that they don't know whether or not it's airborne, but they're decisively saying back in, I believe it was March, I was looking at an infographic they had shared from their official Facebook page from back in March, saying that COVID-19 is not airborne, that it's primarily transmitted by surfaces, et cetera. That's stuff that I originally reported, sure, because that's what everybody was saying. And then I started to do my own research. I saw some compelling evidence to the contrary. And back in, I think, mid to late March, if I remember correctly, I was saying what's now common knowledge. I'm not even trying to put myself out in front of the parade there, because that's not where I'm going. I guess where I'm going with it is, if you were looking around at the most up-to-date research, you can quickly come to the conclusion this thing seems to be primarily airborne transmission. And yet these massive medical regulatory authorities didn't. They got stuff stridently wrong. And then if you remember correctly, and this is just how it works, if Trump were to do the opposite of that, if he were to be pushing for things that are technically right at the time, he would have, and he was criticized heavily for it. So it's frustrating, man. I would rather be siding with the medical authorities on this one, because frankly, they're the authorities. They're the relevant experts. But they got thing after thing after thing wrong early. And yeah, I mean, you criticize me for bringing up the masks, but it's like the first impressions actually do matter. The first stages of your response to a crisis matter heavily. Now, I've said all that stuff. I also think it's probably good for us to try to empathize with the different relevant sides here, unless you're the kind of person who's going to assume that there was a massive conspiracy theory, that the virus, the pandemic was all planned, that whole thing, that there's some massive attempt to erode our liberties, et cetera. Unless you're falling into that camp, I think it's useful to sort of bring a pound of salt and throw a couple grains around every once in a while. Whether you're looking at Fauci or you're looking at Trump or you're looking at Pelosi for that matter. I don't know. Maybe what our politics needs is a little bit more forgiveness and mutual understanding. I don't know, man. I'm kind of all over the place here, admittedly, Jamarl. What's your take?
I mean, Shane, the president of the United States, you keep bringing up Fauci, and it's unfair.
Hey, I talked about him for like half a second earlier, and then
let me explain
what I mean. I brought up his name literally one time. This is after you brought. No, Jamarl, this is after you played a clip of Fauci.
Dude,
I spent less time talking about Fauci than you did.
I'm trying to explain what I mean. The president of the United States has a responsibility to ensure that the equipment, the supplies, the people know what they're doing, that you don't have states fighting each other for equipment and everything else. That's his job. And the president, whose job was to do that, didn't do that, which meant that the entire country has shortages. Great. So now the world has to work in the context of a shortage. Now, add on top of the fact that we have to work in the context of a shortage, you say, all right, well, who needs to get priorities? And these guys came out, and yes, you're right. They made a lot. They lied. They said, all right, well, masks, blah, 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 because they needed it for medical professionals, and they didn't necessarily want to rip those things out the market by people pulling them. That's a president thing. They didn't want to do that. I mean, all things being equal, they would have told everybody to get their masks. Also, science is a sausage factory. I'm sorry, it just is. Like, people usually see science when it's real cool. Like, we like to see it when it's on television, it's in the movies, and everything is like this kind of metallic white, and these guys are in space and everything else, and it's like they encounter something, and, they put it on the computer, and all of a sudden they just know everything about it. It takes forever. It takes a while. And so it's like you encounter something. You learn something. You think something. You give a hypothesis. Your hypothesis is wrong. You update it. You update the public. You have come in contact with something. You update the hypothesis. The hypothesis is wrong. And you do that. That's what science is. It's updating hypothesis, and you get it wrong. And whether you get it right or you get it wrong, you update your understanding of the virus. It's just so happened that all of that was done in the public sphere with everybody watching, and unfortunately with an executive branch that did not do what was necessary to ensure that everybody had the supplies and equipment that they needed. It's not that I'm defensive of Fauci, at least I'm not trying to be. It's just I'm trying to make the point that if I put you in a situation where you don't have what you need to do your job, you're not going to be able to do your job adequately. And we get a broken response in regards to how it should have been. Because, look, I would have loved for Fauci to go and say, get a mask, everybody get a mask. That type of stuff.
I mean, here's the thing. You're talking about Fauci a lot more than I was. I think I've mentioned Fauci's name literally once in my response, and I only mentioned the mask once or twice, too. I was mostly talking about airborne transmission and how horribly wrong they got that, and how they discounted all the stuff at the beginning, too. I mean, we've got to have a conversation about that, man. That's the thing. You've got to be able to criticize both sides here. In any event, we're going into a break.
You don't. That's just it. Not every side has a side. I hate that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But isn't technically, we're literally talking of them in terms of sides here. I mean, anyway, we do have to go into a break. We're going to be back in a minute with Taylor Hudak talking about Assange and more. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We will be right back.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative.
No Taylor just yet.
By the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault lines.
And we're back and we're taking calls. We're trying to bring our guest on, but in the meanwhile, if you would like to speak, she's on. We're here. We're listening. You know what? We've got her on. We got Taylor Hudak on. So never mind about that. If you picked up your phone, please put it back down on the receiver. With us now is Taylor Hudak, independent journalist, activist, and the co-founder of Action for Assange. Taylor, thank you for being with us. Last time we spoke with you, you just come back from an extended trip, journalistic work you were doing there in the UK covering Assange's trial. I'm guessing you're back in the States at this point. How are things going for you?
That is correct. And back in the U.S., things are going well. We expect a decision on Assange's hearing to be made January of 2021, on January 4th. And this is, of course, after this election. And that was on purpose as well.
What makes you say that? Just real quick. What makes you say that part about it being on purpose after the election? Why do you say that, Taylor?
Well, the judge herself admitted to this. Again, it's being heard before Judge Vanessa Baratzer. And this is not at all uncommon to postpone a decision on a hearing, especially when there is 4 to 6 weeks worth of evidence. But again, this does point to the larger question of, could Assange's situation be impacted by the results of the U.S. election? And it's very difficult to tell at this point. And there are differing opinions on both sides.
You know, it's interesting. If they got to hold it to after the election, then it's clearly political. Meaning if the election has any sway whatsoever on the case, meaning on this particular case, then there is a political element to his incarceration. What is your overall appraisal of all of this, by the way? Just from the standpoint of you getting back, you soaking into it, you've watched, like Shane said, you've watched the trial and everything else. What is your overall appraisal from your, clearly from your point of view, but how do you see this?
Well, as far as the Assange case, I am, of course, hopeful that the judge will make the right decision here. I am not sure if his case is going to be impacted by the results of this election. And just to point out, of course, Biden, some years ago, while he was vice president, he said that Assange was more like a high-tech terrorist than a journalist. Of course, his perspective could have changed since then, but we don't really know because this was not an issue that was addressed, I don't think, ever during the campaign. And that extends to Trump as well. But we do know, of course, that Assange is being tried under Trump's DOJ. And it did come out in court that Trump allegedly personally requested for Assange to be arrested. And of course, the Secretary of State right now, Mike Pompeo, has been very vocal about his dislike for WikiLeaks as an organization. So neither of the candidates have been positive when it comes to Assange and the larger issue of press freedoms in the United States and throughout the world. It's a really, really important issue that we unfortunately didn't hear much about.
Was it a fair trial? If you had to give your, again, appraisal, looking at it all. Because personally, this seems to be clearly political to me, that Assange is being held. And I agree with you, both hate him because the intelligence services are part and parcel to both of the administrations. Both use them. And the last thing they want is their information being exposed. Mike Pompeo said, I lied, cheated, and stole for a living. And if you did that, and the guy who exposes all that, you're going to hate that guy. And so, I get it from that standpoint. What do you think the verdict is going to be? Do you think, just based on the way the judge asks questions, the tenor of the way the rulings went, where do you think this is going to go? A, do you think it was overtly political to the point where it was influencing the case? And B, how do you think it's going to turn out?
Well, I definitely think this is a political case. Again, this goes back to, there are several reasons that point to this being a political case, but specifically, former Congressperson Dana Rohrabacher visited Assange in the embassy with an attempt to get information on the source of the DNC leaks. And this was in exchange for a potential presidential pardon. Again, Dana Rohrabacher said that he was sent there on behalf of President Trump. And Assange's attorney, who was at the embassy at the time, Jennifer Robinson, corroborated this as a statement she provided to the court. So that in itself is very significant evidence to suggest this is a political case. But I'm not sure how the judge is going to rule based off of her history. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that she will be preventing the extradition because she has, I think, around like a 96% rate of granting extradition. So the chances are quite high, but of course, this will go to the appeals court.
And coming back to the states for a second, how do you think the president who gets elected, whichever they are, how do you think they're going to act on this? Looking at it, I guess, first from Trump's perspective, and obviously all of this is going to be assumption on our part, but looking at this first from Trump's perspective, then maybe from Biden's, what do you think their motivations are, and what do you see as the sort of likely outcomes when it comes to Julian Assange of their being elected? Taylor?
So again, I am not certain how either of them will react to this. Now, Assange's attorney, Edward Fitzgerald, stated that he believes that if Trump wins, this will be, in fact, a negative thing for Assange. He believes that there is a greater chance for Assange's situation to be bettered if Biden is elected. I'm not sure I so much agree with that. But again, like I said, it is the Trump DOJ who is prosecuting this case. But Trump has been very vocally against the deep state, or what he calls the deep state, which is, of course, the intelligence community. And it would be a real impactful way to stand up to them if you were to grant Assange a pardon. I think he would be more likely to do so in his second term than he would in his first term, of course, because it's a quote-unquote controversial move to make. But Trump is very unpredictable, and it's difficult to tell how this will all play out. I think some of the really important issues right now have to do a lot with, of course, the censorship that we're seeing, and it's really coming from the Democrats, and that was something I wanted to touch on. There is both an authoritarian right, but there's also an authoritarian left. And when it comes to the censorship that we have been seeing, and this does kind of link to the overall themes of WikiLeaks, the censorship we are seeing is very, very concerning as it relates to this U.S. election. Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook said during a CBS interview that they're going to block political and campaign ads the last few days prior to the election. And that is essentially censoring information. YouTube channels have been taken down. This is largely done to accounts and to journalists who are critical of Joe Biden, who are speaking about, of course, Hunter Biden's laptop and those revelations that were posted in the or published in the New York Post.
Taylor, I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, one of those things, we try to cover the Hunter Biden stuff, and, you know, it's one of those things where, it's difficult to link to the content. And, you know, Glenn Greenwald stepped down for basically what Glenn would call censorship. He wanted to do a story. He wanted to point out that there are issues associated with, here are the ones that are true, and they didn't want to hear that. Their thing was, well, Trump is corrupt also, so, you know, it's fair game. That's corrosive to society, right? I've even heard people say, I've heard people say a few things. I've heard people say, well, if Biden has gotten the Me Too thing, well, Trump has also, so they're a wash. Or they would say both of them are corrupt, so it's a wash. And media have gone so far as to basically just try to scrub this off. Like, we don't even want people to be able to see that the story exists, social media and everything else. It's phenomenal. How does this fit in the context of a world almost without Julian Assange? I mean, the fact that Julian Assange is locked up is almost, not just almost, it's experiential symbolism. Because in the same way that the person who's telling the truth is locked up, you have all of these other people who are trying to show something that's true, and the rest of the world doesn't care because they want to get Joe Biden in office. By the way, have you had the opportunity to talk to Assange?
No, I have not.
Has anybody
But
had the
his
opportunity to talk to him
fiancé-
outside of his lawyers?
Yes, he frequently speaks with his fiancée, Stella Morris, who is also part of WikiLeaks' legal team, and she provides regular updates on his situation in Belmarsh Prison, because that's currently where he is being held at this time. There's not a whole lot of updates going on. It was revealed that a good friend of his in prison unfortunately committed suicide, and that's been really difficult for him to cope with. And then there was also some issues a few weeks back with the prison conditions. Again, he's being held in a pretty uncomfortable prison, that's to put it kindly. So the situation is difficult, but to go back to the point you were making about the larger issue of press freedoms, you're right. This attack on the free press through Julian's case is very consequential, and it also emboldens more censorship. It emboldens more attacks on free speech and free press, and also makes it seem like it's a normal and acceptable thing to do, especially when there isn't any pushback from the media, and there really hasn't been, which is why I was saying earlier, it's really a shame that we did not hear the candidates' perspectives on issues related to the free press.
Yeah, it was weird. It was suppressed. I mean, coming back to the Hunter Biden New York Post story here for a second, I remember before the debate started, I was watching on a couple different channels at different points, and at least on NBC, they sort of poisoned the well. Sort of the one preface they gave before the debate started in the last couple of minutes was what may come up tonight is the story of Russian disinformation, something to do with New York Post, Hunter Biden's laptop. They didn't get into it at all. They just got into it briefly enough to sort of muddy the waters and prevent people from trusting anything they might hear from Trump about it. Of course, if you start to look into it, it's shocking what was going on. Twitter's now rolled back the bans on the New York Post's Twitter account and on the relevant tweets about this story, but still the damage was done there. And we'll really see as this stuff kicks into high gear in the next day. Real quick, Taylor, in our last minute here, do you have any opinion on Glenn Greenwald stepping back from The Intercept and that whole chain of events? Again, just talking about journalism here, Taylor.
Yes, I think it's terrible that he was censored by an organization he founded, and there's been a lot of misinformation that he left for monetary purposes. It's absolutely false. It was actually difficult for him to leave, and he was doing very well financially with The Intercept. So I wish him the best of luck in his new endeavors, and everybody should be supporting him right now. He's an exceptional journalist, and of course, wishing him the best of luck. And he was very brave to step away from The Intercept.
Agreed on that one. Yeah, I think agreed on both counts here. Taylor, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
For those listening, that was Taylor Hudak, independent journalist, activist, and the co-founder of Action for Assange. You can, by the way, follow her on Twitter @_Taylor Hudak, and that is Hudak, how you spell Hudak. You can also learn more about her work for Julian Assange at actionforassange.com. That's the number 4, not the word actionforassange.com. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We will be back on the other side of this break.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and digs straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan and Our guest for this segment and the next, we've got Garland Nixon, Sputnik political analyst and the co-host of the Critical Hour and Critical Hour Extended. That show airs every Monday through Friday, excluding federal holidays, of course, and truly exceptional circumstances, every Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik. Garland, thank you for being with us. How are you doing this morning?
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us. All right. Looking forward, we got a big day coming up tomorrow. I just said looking forward, but I'm not sure I'm looking forward to it. It should be exciting in its own way, but it's kind of a choice between Scylla and Charybdis here. I'll just start it off with a big ticket question, Garland. Who do you think is going to win this thing?
Well, normally I'm pretty solid, but right now, based on the facts on the ground, and that is, if I just say forget who's running, but I look at the political, economic environment, I would have to say the incumbent loses this one fairly close. Certainly, you always have to choose the incumbent initially, all things being equal, because the bully pulpit is very, very powerful. So initially, the tie goes to the incumbent, but when I look at the facts on the ground, it's not pretty. I have to say the incumbent loses. But there's some weird things going on right now in that, the Democratic Party is running a candidate who's basically not Donald Trump, effectively a generic candidate. You know what I mean? It's like when they say, well, how would Donald Trump do against a generic candidate? Well, that's what they're doing, in my opinion. They're running a generic candidate because he doesn't present anything to their base that would attract them. So Biden in a squeaker, I will not in any way be shocked if Donald Trump wins.
Yeah, I think that's where I am too. Where I'm not shocked about by a Trump win, but I think Biden wins. I don't think it's going to be a squeaker, but I think Biden wins. The interesting part to this, it's strange, right? They're a presidential race. All of these things are going on, like meaning everything. The country's falling apart. And the presidential race feels like an afterthought. Or at the very least, the presidential race seems to regard us as an afterthought. Like, the public and everything else seems to be secondary because, again, both of these guys are horrible. It's almost like we've decided that we're only going to have two. And then these two, once we decided we have two, realizes, hey, it's only two of us. We can do whatever we want. You know what I mean? Like you said, I think Shane made the analogy to wolves trying to choose who's going to get eaten for supper. The people who voted for Biden because they threw their body at Biden for safety. That's basically what the vote was for. It wasn't, yes, let's do this. Let's change the world. Let's fix all of these issues and everything else. That wasn't what that vote was for. So I guess the question, what I'm asking, what I'm getting at is, if that's not what it is now, it will be at some point, whether it's 2024 or after. Mm-hmm. Do you think Biden, with the people he get, because my assumption is he's going to get a House of Representatives and the Senate. Is he going to deliver? Mm-hmm. And what does it even mean for Biden to deliver? Like, what does a Biden presidency even mean? I'm rambling slightly and I apologize. But what does a Biden presidency even mean? Because what did Biden even run on? I have no idea what Biden even ran on. So it becomes just like, all right, I think he might do something on climate. Okay, great. I'll take it. But I don't know what else that means from the standpoint of climate, because I don't even know if he's going to do that. So I'm asking you, Garland, what does a Biden presidency even mean?
Well, here's the way I look at it. When you ask the question, what will he deliver? The question becomes, for whom? Because what he will deliver depends on who he's delivering it for. If he were delivering it for the broader populace, certainly the broader populace is suffering. So there would have to be some level of, New Deal kinds of stuff going on, at minimum infrastructure to create jobs, at the very minimum. However, I think what the Democratic Party is doing right now, in a way, they're not really running to win. They're trying to, and this is, very cynical politics. I think they're trying to take advantage of the situation to do what they want anyway. They want to move the party they want to unite the mainstream, the neoconservative / neoliberal Democrats with the neoconservative / neoliberal Republicans, and all come together and create kind of that one unity party, right? Between they call them the centrists, but really they're couldn't even come up with a term for their ideology. So at any rate, the Democrats are not going all out to win. They're hoping they win, and they think that they think they've got it in the bag. Therefore, this is the perfect opportunity to turn the party into what they wanted it to be, which is nothing but a conduit for power from, Silicon Valley and military industrial complex, et cetera. So ultimately, what do you get? If you get Biden, you get what they want. They're going to walk away from this thing if they win thinking, or at least arguing, what America wants is this centrist corporate pro-war thingy that we have. So let's move forward than that. They're going to claim a mandate. It's not going to be a pretty situation, because I think the people who believe that they are their base, which would be the voters, are going to be very, very disappointed when they find out that their real base is in Wall Street and Silicon Valley and, certainly the military industrial complex. So they will deliver. Oh, yeah. But they'll deliver for the people they perceive as their base, which is a few dozen oligarchs.
What do you think about, changing very slightly, but on the other side of the election, what do you think about information suppression? So there's, whether it's the Hunter Biden story with the New York Post, Glenn Greenwald recently leaving the Intercept, that's less, political suppression than it is the sort of tacit peer pressure that you get into in journalism, in any culture, frankly. Regardless, on the other side of this thing, it seems like the polarization that would lead to that, and the polarization that has already led to increasing degrees of political suppression by tech giants, et cetera, and by the government increasingly. Where do you think that's going to go on the other side, specifically if Biden wins, but even if Trump wins? Garland, what's your take?
Well, either way, it's going to continue to increase. If Trump wins, it's going to continue to increase in opposition to Trump. If Biden wins, it's one of the reasons it's going to increase, because the coalition, a party is a coalition, and a party bases its power on a coalition. Right now, previously, people in the Democratic Party thought the coalition ended, were like people of color, maybe black people, Latinos, organized labor. There were people traditionally that you saw as the coalition that was the power base for the Democratic Party. Well, that coalition has shifted. And a big part of that coalition now, of course, as I said, Silicon Valley, et cetera, but a part of that coalition is deep state, it's CIA, et cetera. So because part of the Democratic Party's coalition is the deep state, I suspect that we will see more of the unified kind of incestuous relationship between the deep state, Silicon Valley, and that the suppression of information will, I would suspect, dramatically increase. What they're going to say is, we've got to do all of these crackdowns right around the election to stop it from influencing the election, which ironically is their way of influencing the election. But once they do it, they ain't backing up. I also suspect this. I'll add this, because this is part of it. The Democratic Party hates they're not thrilled with conservatives, but they can ally with them, but they despise the left. And one of the things that I think you'll see the Democratic Party really turn and the social media really turn their crosshairs to the left and attempt to purge them from the party and to purge progressive, anti-war, anti-imperialist, anti-corporate voices from social media. I think there will be an attempted purge, maybe at least informal, but I think it'll exist.
And there's not a shred of self-analysis, not a shred. Meaning a Biden win allows them to say, see, it was a fluke. It was just a fluke. Trump won because of the Russians. If otherwise, Hillary Clinton would be our president right now. See, people, we went for Biden after all. Basically, you have two people who are in on a scam. Both of them know that they can do more. One guy, they just decide not to. And, to some degree, the amount of money, the entanglements and all of this other stuff that's around these guys, they make choices about what they want to do versus what they don't necessarily want to do. And it seems, again, like the public is an afterthought. That aggravates me so much. But in this very specific case, how do you see these guys in the way that the parties themselves? It seems that there's no self-analysis of the Democratic Party at all. It didn't look at itself. It didn't have any self-reflection. It didn't make any adjustment. None of that stuff. If anything, they said we need to lie better and we need to sheepdog more. So what? And I think that maybe the question before, instead of asking what does Biden look like, it's a deeper question. What does the party look like? Because, this is not a situation where you can say there's an objective thing that makes them them. Like if I had a party, I call it, the Jamarl Thomas Party, Medicare for All. That would be an objective thing to me. If you rip me apart to the final molecule, that's there. I don't know what that is for the Democratic Party. And so you get to this thing of what is that party? What is that party going to push for when he gets in office? And I don't know what that is. I'm going to leave it to you. What is it? What is it? What are they?
Yeah, I think all you have to do is, look at, as they say, he who pays the piper calls the tune. I think all you have to do really is look at who their big, two things. Look at who their big sponsors are, and you'll see, who the people are behind them. You can kind of see where the direction their policy is going in. The other thing I think is this, and we're at this point, you can't pay attention to what the Democratic Party says. It's not saying anything about policy. Really, neither of them are talking policy anymore. They're just saying, like grand rhetoric about how they're going to bring decency back to the White House and things of that nature. Of course, the conservatives are going to be standing in front of a military vehicle saying, God bless America, and the the Democrats are going to be standing in front of a rainbow flag saying, we're here to help everybody. But the bottom line is, look at our foreign policy, and I think that's what you're going to see, which means this. Who cares what they say? Our foreign policy just says anything. We'll say, yeah, Iran, we've got to stop them because they are going to, work with the Martians now to eat us all. Whatever, it doesn't matter, right? You just say anything and you pretend that it's true. Well, that's what you'll see with a Biden administration, and that is just say what you want to be as though it's true. That deep state part of the deep state coalition that's all about misinformation, disinformation, misleading things, saying the opposite of what it is. That's what we're going to look at. Let me say one thing too. Look back to the Bush administration again. Biden has all of these Bush people supporting him. He has all these Bush people as advisors. Look back to the Bush administration. When France said, hey, we're opposing the invasion of Iraq, and the Bush administration said, France doesn't want peace. When they had the Clean Skies Initiative, which basically meant getting rid of all of your laws and your policies and regulations that kept our skies clean. It simply means you say anything, you call it your policy something that sounds good, and you do whatever you want. And I think that's what you're looking at in a Biden administration. You'll have to look at what they're doing and look at what they're doing and figure it out and ignore what they're saying.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. Because to me, I think you and I have similar mind on this stuff. They were able to basically fail miserably to reality show hosts. And just because Biden not doing anything, inert candidate, in the way that Shane says it, inert. I'm not putting anything forward. I'm not, and because of how bad Trump is, it's like if the president lose 200 or 300,000 people by Christmas, does the president deserve to lose the presidency? Yeah. But what does it mean say for the other guy? Well, the other guy's just standing there. The other guy's not offering anything. He's just pointing to that guy, saying that guy lost 300,000 people. It's horrible. Let's do this. Let's go to the break. This is Garland Nixon, the voice in your ear, if you guys have been enjoying it. Garland Nixon is a Sputnik political analyst and co-host of the Critical Hour and Critical Hour Extended, airing Monday through Friday, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik. You can follow Garland's work as host of the Critical Hour Monday through Friday, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik, and on Twitter at Garland Nixon and Garland Nixon on Facebook and YouTube. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Garland Nixon. Our guest, Sputnik political analyst and the co-host of the Critical Hour and Critical Hour Extended. That show airs every Monday through Friday, excluding federal holidays and truly exceptional circumstances, right here on Radio Sputnik from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern. That, by my quick tally, is from 3 to 5 p.m. Pacific. So whichever coast you're on, you should be able to listen to it. Some parts of it might cut into your normal work hours, depending on your job. Hopefully you have one. And if not, then, you can listen to it later because they go up as post records that you can listen to after they've played live. Anyway, Garland, that was a truly fumbling intro. Thank you so much for being with us. We're talking about the election last segment. I want to continue that. When you were a host on this show, and just in general, I've heard you commentating about the increasing civil unrest that this country faces due to, long-term economic inequality, the inability of politicians to address the real needs and problems of Americans, et cetera. There's a whole, we could have a very long conversation about that. And sometime we probably will, maybe even now. But generally, there's also, one of the symptoms of that, of course, is politically, you get civil unrest, you get protests, you get, in general, this sort of passive disenfranchisement or literal disenfranchisement as people step back from politics, as they disengage in some sense. And then if it gets really ugly, of course, you don't stop there. The protests potentially turn into riots. These things can get ugly, and the ugliness can happen quickly. Going into this election, we're looking at the potential of a real inability to know who the president is within the next couple of weeks, where one or both sides may claim victory prematurely. They may claim victory in an attempt to push the other one out of the race, even though the ballots aren't coming in yet. That could very well happen. And then, of course, where's the backstop with that? If it goes to the Supreme Court, well, Amy Coney Barrett was just put in there. It's not like that has a huge degree of legitimacy among many Americans, and particularly among the Washington elite. It could get very messy. So I'm curious, where do you see this going, either with the election or even assuming somebody gets, even assuming there's a clean transfer of power, even if we were to assume that there's a landslide and the other side just concedes and Biden likely or Trump possibly, they just are put into office. I don't see the other side taking that pacifically. I don't see them taking that peacefully on either side. It seems like things are just getting increasingly nasty and polarized. Where do you see that going, Garland?
I see increasing civil unrest. And again, if you recall, or the listeners of this show will recall back when I was there, my argument, as soon as the lockdown started, within weeks, when I recognized that the government was not going to do any type of economic program to ensure that people could survive, I immediately said, you're going to have civil unrest. There's just no way that you can have people stressed out, upset, unable to pay their bills, and unable to eat and feed their families, and they're going to sit in the house. What I saw was we are creating an environment for civil unrest. All it's going to take is somebody to strike a match. You have all this dry tinder around, strike a match. Well, that's where we are now. We're looking at a mountain of evictions. We're looking at a mountain of basically people hunger all over the place. And so since people are already upset, these types of things normally would cause some level of problems in our city and in our country, and some protests. But it's all going to come together. And I think you're going to see protests. And even going into next spring, I think as the economic woes increase, which they inevitably will, because our government is both unwilling and unable to take the economic actions. And what I mean unable, I mean ideologically unable to take the economic actions that other countries have taken to make their citizens whole and allow them to survive. Either way, what you're going to see, to me, is you're going to see more civil unrest. It's going to continue to get worse. But unfortunately, what happens is this. Both sides are going to interpret that civil unrest to their advantage. So when there's civil unrest, the Trump people will say, well, see, we told you so. The left is crazy and they just want civil unrest. Of course, the Biden people, no matter what happens, will say, well, there you go. Those crazy right wingers, they just want to kill everyone. So they will interpret it to their advantage. And Garland's going to say, as long as the government doesn't do the things like an infrastructure program to create jobs and things of that nature, there will be so much ambient averse anxiety, frustration, and pain that people want to get rid of and don't know how to get rid of it, that all they'll need is a spark, and they will get one spark after another. So we're going to have unrest for some time, I believe, and hopefully it won't get too bad, but I suspect it will.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it just seems like there's pent up energy, like canned heat. That's what it feels like. And it's like on top of that, you have some people who are doing monstrously well, and other people who are doing, desperately horrible. And, the social contract seemed to just not care. I mean, you have some people who are in Congress who basically want to just say, hey, the people who are doing well, that could just lead the market. Like, it's amazing, this discrepancy between the rich and the poor in regards to the way their politics has broken down. The Democratic Party, I think the worst aspect of this, to me, is that Joe Biden, like Shane said, is an inert candidate. Joe Biden is not putting anything forward in regards to, an affirmative project to deal with all of the things that are taking place. And there is traumatic stuff going on. Like, the world is not frozen right now, even though it seems that way in regards to the elections and the things that these guys are pushing. How do you think Joe Biden is going to get along with some of the other foreign policy adventures? I mean, Donald Trump didn't start any wars, so that's at the very least one positive aspect. But we have a Democratic Party whose policy, who used Russiagate as a weapon. And, my greatest fear was that the Russiagate energy doesn't die down. It's like the people who you convince that stuff don't just stop believing it the moment that you get in office. That is energy and consequences. What do you think the consequences are going to be from the standpoint of Biden getting in office, looking out at the world, and dealing with those other countries after a Trump administration?
A couple of things. Number one, I think part of the, quote, return to normal from their perspective is going to be returning not to even the Obama administration. Let's not forget, the Israelis were mad at Obama towards the end of his administration. He wasn't even on speaking terms with Netanyahu, right? Obama did the JCPOA, the hawks in his own party opposed that, the Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Menendez, et cetera. So the hawks in his own party opposed that. So I think people are making a mistake in that they think that Biden's return to normal means return to the Obama administration's policies. Actually, Biden is to the right of Obama when it comes to foreign policy. If you look at the people he's surrounding himself, the return to normal that he and the Bill Kristols of the world and those people are talking about is a return to the Bush administration's policies, which are even more aggressive in some ways than the Obama administration's policies. If we look at what Biden did during these debates, he would parrot some of these absurd assertions, such as Bountygate, the arguments that Iran was sending some emails in Florida saying vote for Trump, that these were valid accusations. So we can look for Biden as a person who's going to be certainly, to me, again, a conduit for power. The people in the deep state will be able to filter their absurd accusations through Biden. All they got to do is say it. Biden will repeat it and act as though it's true. The Silicon Valley people, they'll be able to do the same thing. So I look at a Biden foreign policy as very dangerous, and I look at it as a return to the, quote, normal of a W. Bush foreign policy consensus, not even an Obama policy consensus. It's a return to the Wolfowitz doctrine, but they're not going to be quite as belligerent at the EU. I think that's the difference.
Garland, thanks so much for being with us. Okay, so I would actually want to come back to the civil unrest thing for a second. Assuming stuff gets truly bad, and this ties into the information suppression stuff we were talking about in the last segment too. Assuming stuff gets truly bad, is there anywhere, I guess in the sort of long run, future historic, almost a dystopian perspective, Where do you think this is going for our society? Assuming both of these things hold true, assuming on the one hand, civil unrest increases, more people are protesting, people are broadly pushing back in harsher ways against the government, and on the other hand, the government and social media companies, tech giants, and search giants, in the case of Google, social media companies are able to effectively suppress and in some cases control those movements. That's an admittedly not a very rosy picture. That's a pretty gloomy picture of the future, but I can't help but see that kind of thing coming to pass. Where do you think that goes? Where do you think that leaves journalists? Where do you think that leaves us as sort of, media folks? Where do you think that leaves the American people? Finally, Garland, what's your take?
Here's what I think. It's like a person. Suppressed emotions don't go away. They just come out in uglier ways and in other areas. So I think that there will be civil unrest. There will be, new groups and organizations and movements coming up trying to push for the policies they want. I think the powers that be are mistaken in thinking that they can just close down and suppress those voices. They'll be mushed down, but they'll come out. They will definitely come out. And I tell you what, I'm really interested in looking towards the midterms. Because I suspect that Joe Biden will, if he gets elected, he will run to I'm not even going to call it the right. He's going to run towards globalism, neoliberalism, neoconservatism. The voters in his party, at some point, a lot of them are going to be furious. It could be a breakup. But I suspect the midterms, there will be Jamal Bowman's, Cori Bush's, AOC's, et cetera, people who are, and here's what I say about them. Don't just look at their policies. AOC was what? She was a bartender. Jamal Bowman was a teacher. Cori Bush was a nurse. I think you'll see people who are coming from more traditional blue-collar careers starting to show up in the primaries. That's what I'm going to start looking towards. Who's going to say my name's in the primary? And I'm going after the next big name, Elliot Engel or whoever. I think that's going to be interesting. But like you were saying, we got to get there first, without running for our lives and being eaten by zombies. And there ain't no guarantee we're going to make it. We're going to make it through that.
Garland, we have about 30 seconds left. Sanders, he's up there. He's octogenarian. Who's going to lead the lefties after Sanders has finally put his hat up? I mean, and by the way, Sanders said something really interesting where he was talking about going after drug companies if Biden wins. He was talking about basically they were giving him a perch. Where does he goes, and who's number two behind Sanders? And you have
here's what I think. I think Sanders is mistaken that if these people win Sanders, they will move to purge the Sanders, the AOCs, et cetera. They will move to reshift that party. I believe they've been lying to them all along, and they're going to try to purge the left out of their party. They're going to try to shove them out and shut their mouths once and for all and say, we won, you didn't, go away, we ain't listening to you anymore. We'll be over here with Bill Kristol and the McCain crew.
I do think they put those conservatives on those stage for the quote-unquote Biden Republican for that exact reason, Garland. Because it's like the left is unruly, so we're going to have these guys as a pivot. That voice that you were hearing is Garland Nixon, Sputnik political analyst and co-host of the Critical Hour and Critical Hour Extended, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. Shane Stranahan is my co-host. This is Fault Lines. We will be back.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is now time for our last hour, the last hour this morning at least, of the most disruptive show covering news and events across those divided states. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And as always, we're getting straight into the news this morning. We give you a headline wrap up once at 7, once at 8, and once at 9 a.m. Eastern. Or if you're on the West Coast, if you're Pacific time, 4, 5, and 6 a.m. Pacific. First up in the news, Today is the last day of campaigning before voters head to the ballot boxes tomorrow to choose America's presidential candidate. Early voting has dominated the election cycle with well over half of all expected votes cast already. Both Trump and Biden are campaigning today in Pennsylvania, with Biden in Western Penn and Kamala Harris campaigning in Eastern Penn. Trump will be holding rallies in North Carolina, in the state of Pennsylvania, as well as in Wisconsin and Michigan. He's really jet-setting around, I guess, there. Jamarl, we've been having ongoing conversations, of course, as we would about the election coming up here. What's interesting to me is how nobody seems to know what the heck is going to happen. Most of the polls, most of the margins here are pretty strong in Biden's favor. 10 points in a lot of cases, 12 points, well outside of the margin of error. What's your take? I mean, what do you think is going to go on?
I honestly think Biden is going to win this. I think Biden is going to win this, and I think Democrats are going to take the House, and I think they're going to take the Senate. I mean, the catch becomes, what does Biden put through from standpoint of legislation? Because what it doesn't mean for Biden to get in office at all. Like, this is not like if I'm running a race, for example, and I'm like, I'm going to run this presidential race. Okay, why are you running? What is the theory of your case? The theory of my case is I'm going to ensure that each and every person on this planet have Medicare for all. I'm in this country with Medicare for all. I'm going to make sure each person go to school. That's the theory. And you push that. Then people know when you get in, that's what that person's going to do. Joe Biden has just said, I'm inert. I'm just not going to be Trump. And what I suspect, unfortunately, is basically, I'm going to get Kamala Harris in here because she doesn't have the power to get here on her own knees, on her own steam. That's what I think. I mean, so... it feels like, it does feel like they're trying to slip one in. And the slip one in is Kamala. And the person who can be using to do it is Joe Biden. Even though Joe Biden wants to be president himself. That's what I think. I have no idea what Joe Biden is. I think Joe Biden is going to win, though. If you ask me who would I think is going to win. But I would not be shocked if Trump wins. Not in the least. Because the polling, sometimes that stuff is a confirmation bias. It's like, hey, who do you want to win? And the person doesn't want to answer that question because they may actually like Trump. They may hate Biden. Or they may get sick of it. They may not feel like going in to polling. You might even have it go to court. I mean, because if Donald Trump says, I disagree with that, Biden says, I disagree with that, it goes to the Supreme Court. And then you have the three people. Amy Coney Barrett, does she sit down? Does any of them sit down that Trump put in? I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the air on this stuff. But my thought is, Biden wins.
I can't help but agree. I'll be honest. I want it to be more complicated than that in some sense, not just because that gives us more to talk about, but because also I really don't want to have an attempted return to some horrible status quo. That's like, there's this like liminal quality about Trump where you're wondering, okay, well, back in 2016, what's going to come on the other side of this? What does this portend in the wider course of the history of humanity? And if it's just going back into the same old with the last vice president, now the president of the United States, that's not only boring, that's also distressing because it's just more of the same. It's just more betting on black, so to speak. You're just continuing to double down on past failures. And at a certain point, we're all caught in that bet. We are the bet. And anyway, moving on to the next headline here in related news.
It's really unfortunate, Shane. It really is.
It is, man.
I mean, there is nothing to look forward to. Honestly, this is not, I'm putting forward this vision and this is what I'm going to do and all of us are in it together and all of us that's gone. This is not the Kennedy era where America, all of us, are pushing and going into space as a country, and all of us have something to look up to, and everybody who's working in that knows they're working towards this particular larger objective, and that's out the window. That's gone. We don't have that anymore. I mean, and it's just depressing. I would love for a candidate to say, this is what we're going to do. And when he gets in, he has a very specific mandate to do X and to do Y. And you, as part of the general public, you might be part of it. You gave him money, so you feel like you're part of it. I mean, but let's say he does accomplish it, and it's a larger thing, and your kid grows up being a part of that larger thing, and that somebody else's kid, they grow up. That's part of America. We have so many options, and we don't use those options because one guy realizes that the other guy is horrible, so I don't only have to be X. because he's white. And it's so depressing. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Shane.
No worries. All right, next headline here. In related news with the election here, a federal judge is ordering the USPS to mandate some of the extraordinary measures that agency announced earlier in the week. Specifically, Judge Emmett Sullivan is requiring the USPS to use its express mail network to expedite the delivery of ballots today through Wednesday. That's the day after the election. The USPS must also affix a legible postmark to every ballot to mark the date those ballots are collected. The targeted requirements come as new court filings show that for the third day in a row, the U.S. Postal Service moved fewer ballots on time in critical battleground states than it did in the previous day. So there's a degradation of services going on there. I'm guessing simply due to overuse, guessing that, the USPS is having to do a lot of work here, a lot of mail-in ballots being sent in.
Well, also, they
fortunately, of course, this would weigh on the election.
Keep in mind, DeJoy crippled them also. Like, they have to build back that stuff from the stuff that DeJoy was doing, I would imagine.
I believe you. In other headlines, a gun battle is underway inside Kabul University after multiple attackers stormed the sprawling campus in the capital of Afghanistan that forced students to flee the campus, officials said. At least 6 people have been wounded there. And this, by the way, is as the university was hosting a joint Afghan-Iranian book fair. I don't know what significance that has, but that may well have some significance in terms of why the shooting took place, why there was this attack. Interior Ministry spokesman Tariq Arian said the fighting was ongoing as security forces surrounded the campus. In the Philippines, Typhoon Goni hit this weekend. More than 2 million people were affected. Villages were left buried, and tens of thousands of people huddled in evacuation centers. Several bridges were destroyed, including one that split in half after a river swelled, according to local reports. Other routes are impassable because of debris, floods, and landslides, and naturally, due to that fact, damage, including the cost of human lives, could take days to assess. So this is going to be something that we, learn more about in coming days. Unfortunately, this is probably going to fall out of the American press very quickly, and hopefully we prove an exception to that. A leader of Tanzania's main opposition party has been arrested, along with other major members, after calling last week's election fraudulent and asking for the public to protest the results of that election. And with that, you've listened to the news on Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. It's this interesting thing, Jamarl. You have an opportunity. I'm not saying just specifically you. We all have an opportunity tomorrow as we go out to vote in the election. But really what I'm talking about here is we have an opportunity. We host a radio show. We can do things. We can do some interesting stuff potentially if we want to. So I'm thinking of better ways of trying to aggregate the news or something like this. I've been thinking about this for a while. It's like I'm still trying to get up to speed with a lot of the larger narratives that guide current events in American politics and in foreign relations, et cetera, from an American perspective. It's like I'm trying to bring myself up to speed in a lot of this stuff. There's a lot to learn. And what I really want is an accurate Wikipedia or something like this, an accurate representative version of Wikipedia that isn't hopelessly biased, but gives me some summary review of key topics. But we don't have that, man. There isn't a thing. Wikipedia, again, hopelessly biased. It's long since been biased past the point of any objective usefulness. And then there are interesting conversations about exactly why that is. The fact that it has to comport completely with the sort of establishment media's takes on things. The fact that certain sources are just discredited right from the get-go, and therefore you only ever have, the establishment view of X story, of, various news stories that you'd want to have more than one view on. So that's useless, and it always has been to some extent. And then you're left with okay, well, where do I go? So say that I want to learn the real deal about the Syrian war, including the false flags and stuff that we've talked about with Maram Sousli on here. There's really nowhere to go. There aren't that many documentaries to watch. What you're left with are years of conversations and years of articles that I think you just have to pore over if you ever want to get a semblance of accuracy here. Do you have any tips or even just thoughts on that issue, Jamarl? What's your take?
Well, I mean, part of it is incentives. What are the incentives built into the people who in the countries that you're talking about? Meaning, like, if you know that the U.S. has a certain, let's say, tenor, and you know that they've used, let's say, rebels, terrorists, in order to knock down a government. Now, you read the New York Times. The New York Times says the United States has spent $1 billion trying to knock down the Syrian government in this kind of shadow war. The catch here is that the New York Times is going to write it with a spin as if the United States was a good guy in that. They would never write it as if the U.S. was the bad guy. And so you almost have to read it. It's not so much that the stuff isn't there. The stuff is there now. It's more so it's written with this kind of spin that's remarkable. Like the Libya thing. There's an article from the New York Times where it goes into the Libyan war, how much money that we dropped into Libya. And there's another one where we greenlit the Yemen war, New York Times, where Washington Post, where they're talking about the JCPOA and they want Obama is trying to get Saudi Arabia to basically not bother him for the JCPOA, and Saudi Arabia wants a war with Yemen. And so they greenlit the war, despite the fact Obama knew the war was going to be bloody. Now, that's stuff that you find in newspapers. When it happens, you read it. Now the catch becomes the spin. Now when I read it, I'm horrified by that. You just greenlit a war. But oftentimes it's like one little line in an entire line of something else. I guess it's not one thing to read. It's one thing you soak in. And as you hit story after story after story after story, you start to get a conceptual model of, okay, this is how we regard these countries. It's that. It's not a book, like one book to read. I can give you lectures, I can give you books to read, I can give you all that stuff. But ultimately, you soak into it. Chomsky's lectures are fascinating on pretty much anything. Zen's lectures are fascinating. The gentleman Chalmers Johnson, he died a few years ago, but he has several books, 2 books, one called Blowback and the other one is, I can't think of the name of the other one, but both of those books are fantastic. And they give you a context of the world. Like just in the sense of the way countries engage other countries in the way that the United States engages other countries. Chalmers Johnson is awesome. In fact, I would say just look at his lectures. Those things are phenomenal. But it really does end up in soaking into it, Shane. Because I know what you're talking about. When I first started this, I started this just reading articles, I think. I was injured. It was at a time I was ill. I couldn't do what the other programmers would do, so they let me sit downstairs. At that point, I was kind of dejected from programming, and I was just studying information, history, news, etc. I started with news, and it didn't make sense. And I was like, well, wait a minute, why are people acting this way? And I'm doing kind of like what you did. And it's like slowly as you soak into it, it starts to make more and more sense in regard to you coming up with a framing of the world. It's not just one or two things you can read. It's soaking into it, if that makes sense. I
hear you. That would be that is the long, slow route.
It is.
And that's ultimately what you got to do, I think. Wouldn't it be so much more convenient?
There's no there to it. There's no magic to it. It really is not.
I hear you. Mostly, I want to send a plaintive wail up to the sky and hope that at some point there's somebody there to answer me and pat me on the head and tell me, Shane, it'll be a little bit easier. Here's a guide you can read. Here's something you can follow. But that wouldn't be any fun, frankly. In any event, we've got to go into a break.
And the reason why I always hit you, because not all issues have all sides. Like, not all issues have multiple sides. But let's do this. It's 9:15. We got to take a break. We waited at the last minute. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan. Shane and I will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Catch all the breaking global, political, and economic news as it happens. Sputnik brings an all-star lineup with expert opinion from some of the biggest names in the news today. Noam Chomsky.
Turkey, U.S. ally, their main goal is to attack the Kurds, the one ground force opposing ISIS. And there have been a kind of a funnel for support of ISIS, not officially, but in practice.
Peter Sunde, co-founder of the Pirate Bay.
We don't have any sort of democratic control over the internet. And I think that we're very naive when we think that the internet itself is intrinsically good. It's not. It's just a very neutral technology that is being used for good things, but more and more being used for evil things.
Icelandic Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson.
Increased activities in the Keflavik airbase, and that has to do with more activities from the Russian Northern Fleet in the ocean around Iceland, and also, of course, these usual flights of the bombers.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
We're the ones that destroyed the government of Libya. We're the ones that, in a pipeline dispute, that helped destroy the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We're the ones who invaded Iraq.
Former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry.
The hostile relationship between the United States and Russia today is dangerous for both countries, not because either country would actually want to start a military conflict, but because there's always a danger of blundering.
Sputnik talks to the brightest minds in politics and current affairs to find out what's really happening. Tune in. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station from Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you're digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever content, your whatever channel or whatever platform you're consuming this content on, definitely give us a like and share this video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, and I would thank you for the opportunity for allowing me. Thank you for allowing us to do so. So coming to us for this segment is Mark Sloboda, international relations and security analyst. You can follow Mark on Twitter at Mark Sloboda1 and find him on Facebook at facebook.com/Gramsci. Mark, welcome to the show.
Jamal, Shane, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on Fault Line.
No, man, I always appreciate having you on. I always enjoy the conversations. I want to go to Nagorno-Karabakh early. What's the latest? I mean, the last that I've heard was a peace treaty was tried by Moscow. It wasn't worked. Both sides point to the other, saying that it was your fault. No, it was your fault. You fired on me. You fired on me. At this point, hundreds have died. What is going on? What's the latest in Nagorno-Karabakh? And of course, this is between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And these two sides in a frozen conflict. People are trying to get the frozen conflict to basically go back to being frozen. So, latest.
Yeah. Okay, so there have been a total of 4 failed humanitarian ceasefires so far. 2 pushed by Russia, 1 pushed by the United States, and another one over the weekend pushed by the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, of which Russia is also a part. Every one of them has failed almost immediately, and there is no attitude really for peace with the status quo on the ground as it is now by either government in Armenia or Azerbaijan. The Azerbaijani population is really whipped up into a nationalist fervor. They would probably revolt if the Azerbaijani president stopped the offensive to retake Azerbaijani territory long held by Armenia at this point. And in Armenia and the Armenian majority ethnic enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh in Azerbaijani territory, there is also no willingness to accept a ceasefire that froze the status quo on the ground, because Azerbaijan has made quite large territorial advances, particularly in the flatter terrain south of Nagorno-Karabakh. They have recovered most of, Azerbaijan has recovered most of 4 out of 7 occupied regions of Azerbaijan that have been militarily occupied by Armenia since the frozen conflict, was put in place with a longer-term ceasefire way back in 1994. And now the Azerbaijani forces are starting to swing north. They are threatening the mountainous Lachin corridor, which is the primary difficult mountain road transit point between Armenia proper and Nagorno-Karabakh. They are reportedly, our Azerbaijani forces are within just 10 kilometers of that corridor, and particularly of the city of Shushi, called by Azerbaijani Shusha, which is an important political and strategic objective, really for both sides. For Armenia, it's particularly important strategically because seizing it would basically mean cutting off the Lachin corridor's entrance into Nagorno-Karabakh, and it's really a very short distance from Shushi to Stepanakert, the Armenian enclave's capital. So it's a vital military point. Also politically, from the Azerbaijani side, it's considered the heart of Azerbaijani Nagorno-Karabakh. There's a long cultural and historical tradition there. Azerbaijanis are very worked up about the prospect of retaking this city. And it has been mentioned by the Azerbaijani president Aliyev many times that the offensive could never be stopped before Shushi is recovered by Azerbaijan. It's one of the principal, at least intermediary aims of the military offensive. It will be much more difficult to take. Mm-hmm.
Well, what happens to the Armenians in those locations? I mean, because right now, basically what it seems like is Turkey is giving these guys a push. These guys are feeling themselves because they've been, meaning Azerbaijan, the military and everything else over the course of the number of years. They're trying to take back territory. The world is not necessarily going to intrude, or at the very least it doesn't necessarily seem, as long as it stays contained. To a certain degree, I mean, you have Turkey bringing terrorists over, apparently, and you have, at least according to Alexander Makaris, Russians pushing, or Russia, let's say, putting in support potentially. I guess what I'm asking is, what happens to the Armenians in those locations? And does the military in Nagorno-Karabakh have enough to push Azerbaijan back? Or basically, is Azerbaijan going to take back those territories?
Okay, so in the majority of territory that Azerbaijan has recovered so far, these 4 out of 7 Armenian occupied regions, there was never an Armenian majority in these areas. And when Armenia took these areas in the early 1990s, they really truly ethnically cleansed the area of Azerbaijanis. They burnt mosques, they drove people out of their homes, and so on. And there is a lot of Azerbaijani who are very eager to go back home to these regions. There have been some small Armenian settlement in these regions since then, but it is more than likely that Armenians fled, any Armenians there in these largely vacant, occupied regions fled before Azerbaijani forces got there, because it's almost a surety that they would meet the same fate that they were dishing out to Azerbaijanis in the same location almost some 30 years ago, ethnic cleansing of a rather harsh variety. Now, as Azerbaijani forces start to move into Nagorno-Karabakh itself, which is Armenian majority, I would also expect the majority of the Armenian population there to vacate before Azerbaijani forces take the area. whether that is further into Nagorno-Karabakh, further up into the mountains, or to Armenia itself. Of course, the problem comes that if Azerbaijan manages to cut off the Lachin corridor, then the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh would have no way to get out of Nagorno-Karabakh, even if they tried to evacuate to Armenia. There's simply no place, no way. It would, hopefully some political settlement would be reached at that point before
Also
we're
weapons,
facing a return of an Armenian genocide.
Wait. That's also a weapons area. In order for weapons to get in from Armenia into Nagorno-Karabakh, I mean, if that area is cut off, that's also cutting off the ability to supply weapons. Or misunderstanding?
Weapons, food, medical supplies, everything. If the Lachin corridor falls, it is really a matter over.
So if that corridor falls, that means Armenia is going to get further involved in the conflict. They would have to, by definition, just from a military standpoint, if they're trying to preserve Nagorno-Karabakh. Does that make sense? If you and I are planning...
Yeah, I think Armenia is already trying to a rather large extent to keep that corridor open at this point. But the truth is that Azerbaijan simply has a much greater military advantage now because they've spent their oil and gas wealth over the last 30 years building up a military to retake the occupied portions of their own country from Armenia. They are not getting much, help internationally. Azerbaijan is accusing Russia of supplying Armenia with military arms, but Russian military flights have to go a rather circuitous route over the Caspian Sea, down over Iranian territory, which does allow transit, and into a narrow corridor into Armenia. And Russia does have one military base in Armenia, on the Turkish border, not on the Azerbaijani border. But they have set up, in the past just few days, several military posts along the Armenian-Azerbaijani border. And they have made it clear that so far that they have no intention of interfering into matters in what is internationally recognized Azerbaijani territory, even Nagorno-Karabakh itself, but that if the fighting touches Armenia proper, Armenian territory, then Russia would step in and intervene because Russia does have mutual defense treaties with the both bilaterally and within the Collective Security Treaty Organization with Armenia. And there are reports in the press that Russia has not used its advanced electronic warfare equipment to knock down some 9 Azerbaijani Turkish drones out of the skies in the last couple of weeks. But supposedly those drones were in Armenia near the Russian military base, approaching the Russian military base from Turkey. And it's unclear why Turkey would put drones in that area, possibly pushing Russia to intervene if it sensed a military threat to its base in Armenia.
Mark, let me do this. Let's take a break. I'm going to bring you back because there's a question. I'm fascinated by this topic. I get a sick thrill. I'm a lefty, yes, but I get a sick thrill out of issues of military. I played chess my entire life. And these things are always fascinating to me, the politics and the let's say the tit for tat, the consequences, action consequence. So we're here with Mark Sloboda, International Relations and Security Analyst. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Shooting from the left.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil. John Gaunt. Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines
And
on
we're
Radio
back.
Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. We are joined by Mark Sloboda, International Relations Security Analyst. Shane, go for it. I'm sorry. I didn't apologize if I screw up, Shane.
You're good. Mark Sloboda, thank you for being with us.
Shane, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on Fault Lines.
Always an honor and more than a pleasure to have you on the show for sure. For those listening, if you weren't clued in already, I will clue you in now. Mark Sloboda is an international relations and security analyst. And by the way, you can and you should follow Mark on Twitter at MarkSloboda1. That's the number 1. And you can also find him on Facebook at facebook.com/Gramsci. That's GRAMSCI. We've gotten into a conversation about that before, about that historical figure. I'm just going to briefly acknowledge his presence in your social media identity, and then we can move on from there. We were talking about Nagorno-Karabakh in the last segment. I actually want to move on to other countries on the rim of the former Soviet Union, modern-day Russian Federation. Talking about Belarus, also talking about Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan, a couple of weeks ago, went through an election. Very quickly, that election was called fraudulent by members of various opposition parties. And then there was a sort of free-for-all in about the span of a week, I think it was, not much longer than a week, where effectively the government was recreated. That feels like a precarious situation from a world away, Mark. What's your take on those events? What am I getting wrong? What should be included in there? And where is the country now?
Yeah, so the parliamentary elections there were called fraudulent by opposition supporters in the streets in what were in part protests, but much more supporters of particular sides in what is pervasive clan and regional politics in Kyrgyzstan. And you could really say that there really was a soft coup. A nationalist figure, Sadir Japarov, who was previously kind of a minority politician in the country, a nationalist. He was released from prison during these protests / putsch. And very quickly, the mayors of the two principal cities of Kyrgyzstan, the president, the prime minister, the speaker, basically every authority figure in the country stood down. They resigned under pressure. And it is supposed that Japarov has powerful economic patrons. It is widely assumed that those are with, organized crime. With powerful oligarchs in the country. And Japarov was quickly in a rump parliamentary session and then in a more proper one, elected prime minister. And according to the Constitution, when the president stepped down, the Speaker of the Parliament should have assumed the role. The new Speaker did not. He declined, leaving Japarov as the prime minister to assume the role of interim president. And he has, with no real precedent under Kyrgyzstani constitution, he is now holding both offices. He is both the prime minister and the president of the country, and seems to have some degree of almost seized total control from being in prison just over a month ago. And he has moved to first call for new elections and then push off those new elections. They may not be held now until next June. And at the same time, he is calling for constitutional reform. He wants a return to a Kyrgyzstani republic where the presidential office has more powers, where the parliamentary threshold of a political party getting into parliament is lowered from 7% to 3%, which would make parliament, have more voices and thus more of a raucous and less effective body. And he is pushing to change the Constitution so that he can run for president again whenever new elections are held for the presidency, because according to the Constitution, as it is written now, whoever is the interim president, and again, he's both the interim president and the prime minister, cannot run for president then. He wants to change that. And it seems that he may get everything he wants. There have been a series of small protests of a wide variety of issues and small parties breaking out in Kyrgyzstan in the last week, but it seems rather late and a muted response. It seems that the country has basically accepted him essentially seizing control of the country with some willing degree of acquiescence. And I guess the big reason this isn't headlines is because it doesn't, by all views so far, it does not entail any type of geopolitical flip for Kyrgyzstan. This all seems to be mostly domestic. They're not going to leave any of the Russian organized multilateral organizations such as the Collective Security Treaty Organization or the Eurasian Union, at least according to what Japarov says, who says that Russia is Kyrgyzstan's most important strategic partner and will remain so. So there doesn't seem to be any type of real color revolution flavor to this. Or its opposite, of course, of a Russian-inspired revolution in the country. This seems to be entirely domestic, entirely, shall we say, politically nasty, and it does have possible repercussions. Ethnic violence broke out in Kyrgyzstan in contested elections back in 2015, and between the Kyrgyzstan majority and the Uzbek minority. There is also a small Russian minority in the country. And with a nationalist taking the helm of the country, seemingly almost entirely by himself, there remains the question if we could see a return to ethnic tensions. We haven't seen it so far, but it is worrying.
Mark, thank you for that great overview. That's honestly very representative. I want to pivot. We wanted to talk to you about Belarus, also the situation going on there. This comes as in the last couple of weeks, after the EU Parliament said that they would not recognize the re-election of Lukashenko. They actually also awarded Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the main opposition leader there, gave her an award, a sort of commemoration of the work that she's been doing. This seems like the EU pushing themselves further away from Belarus. On the other side of this, though, of course, is Belarus moving into a much closer relationship with Russia, something that seems to have been brewing for decades. We've talked in the past about the idea of a union state or a joint state, a Belarusian-Russian joint state. This also comes as Lukashenko has closed down borders to the north, the west, and I believe the south as well, to Poland, Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania. Just setting out up another interesting divide, a geopolitical divide potentially in that case. Although, to be clear, he was saying the reason he did that was COVID-19 and the influx of potential infected folks from other countries. Mark, that's a brief intro to the subject. Where is Belarus right now? Where do you think Lukashenko's thoughts are leading that country?
Okay, so there still is a political crisis in the country as a result of disputed and probably, to be fair, fraudulent elections in favor of Lukashenko. That we still seeing large weekend protests, somewhat smaller women's protests on Saturday, and then larger national protests, by all oppositionists on Sundays. The numbers of those protests, by all accounts, have started to go down somewhat. the self-proclaimed leader of the opposition right now, who was on the ballots, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. She is the wife of a liberal blogger and was the last real opposition candidate who was actually left on the election ballot. No one knows what her real vote total was. The Central Election Commission awarded her a 10% to Lukashenko's 80%, although that's widely called under question. She fled the country right after the election and has set up a shadow government in Lithuania, a coordination, basically a transitional council that does include advisors of hers that were until previously employees of the Atlantic Council and the state media outlet Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and includes a number of prominent Belarusian liberal activists and figures that has caused Moscow to take some alarm at the shadow government being set up within the EU and being very strongly supported by the EU, in particularly Lithuania. And there is a growing movement towards sanctions. Figures in Belarus, not Lukashenko himself, but political figures in the country have already been sanctioned by the EU. Nothing against Lukashenko himself yet, and no sector-wide sanctions. But the opposition appears to be losing some steam. There continue to be no breaks in the security services, the police, the military, or in the Belarusian parliament. No major political defections from the Lukashenko regime there. And he has the grudging acceptance of Moscow. There's no love lost between Lukashenko and Putin because of his heel dragging on the further integration of the Union state for the last decade or so, and Belarusians' demands for continued energy subsidization of the Belarusian economy by Russia, which Russia has started to curtail off. But they've basically decided that the devil they know is better than the potential for geopolitically flipping Lukashenko during street protests and revolution. That at least an end result might end up something like what we saw in Ukraine. So they are instead pushing Lukashenko towards promises for constitutional reform and possibly reholding elections. Again, after that constitutional reform is complete, maybe in about 2 years. So a much shortened term for him there.
Mark,
supposedly.
A secondary government. Mark, a secondary government in the UK, in the EU is astonishing. I didn't know that. They've set up a secondary government to contest Belarus's main government. They elected, Belarus is the main government in the EU. That's amazing. And we only have like 1 minute left. I'm sorry. There's one question I wanted to ask you before we end this, before we close out. It is about 30 seconds. It has to do with Armenia. It's basically going back to where we started. Why did Armenia stand by and watch Azerbaijan build up this kind of weapons inventory if these guys were at each other's throats like this?
Because Armenia has a much smaller economy, no natural energy resources, and they are a landlocked country, mostly surrounded by enemies, Turkey and Azerbaijan itself, with only a very small border with Iran, and a border to the north with Georgia, which has seen a pro-U.S. revolution put it at odds with Armenia, which is still allied with Russia in recent years. They really had no avenue for economic growth, and were already spending what they could on military defense ties. They just couldn't keep pace with Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan, of course, has also gotten support from Turkish and Israel militarily in the last few years, which have pushed them even further ahead.
I see. Okay, let's do this. Let's take a break. This is Mark Sloboda, International Relations and Security Analyst. Mark, I want to thank you for joining us. Mark, where can people find you?
on Twitter and Facebook, and on a plethora of other radio shows on Sputnik, although Fault Lines is my favorite.
Oh, thank you. We appreciate it. You guys are listening to Fault Lines, Mark's favorite, with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back with the wrap in a moment.
Fault Lines.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And we are taking your calls. The phone number is 202-521-1320. Again, the phone number is 202-521-1320. And we're around. So if you want to call us, you really should. Now it's about your best chance. In fact, for the rest of the show, now is your only chance. This is our last 12 to 13 minutes. And realistically, that gives us enough time for about 3, maybe 4 calls. First up, we've got Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Again, the phone number is 202-521-1320. Tarif, you're on. What's going on, man?
How y'all doing? Good morning. I have a comment before I go on a comment. I like to say free Assange now. WikiLeaks whistleblowers that's helped out WikiLeaks and all whistleblowers. I'm a whistleblower myself. Just Google my name, Tyree Simon, whistleblower Tyree Simon. Okay, I was watching Whitney Webb and other journalists. They were talking about a dark winter, that some strange things might happen. You might have like a biological chemical attack might happen, where measles might be released before the election or during election day, causing a constitutional crisis, dealing with the ballots not being counted correctly, or something else happening. Hillary, Kamala, or Pelosi could take over from Joe Biden. White supremacists and Antifa provocateurs might be to blame for election interference at the polls tomorrow, and that could cause problems. You might have a biological attack. Hopefully nothing like that will happen, but they might blame white supremacists and also Iran. That could lead us to a war. 3 states could secede from the U.S., Washington, Oregon, and California. Hopefully that won't happen. If that does, that could cause a constitutional problem. This dark winter stuff, we're going into a dark winter. It's going to seem like it's going to be kind of rough. I hope nothing happens, and the vote count could cause a constitutional crisis if strange things start happening with that. So all I'm saying is everybody just be on their best behavior, go out and vote. Don't harass nobody at the poll, and just sit back and watch the news and hope for the best. That's all I can say.
Tarif, thank you for the call. I feel you on that one. At this point, all bets are off and all bets are in. All that we can actually do at this point is just sort of watch as this thing rolls out. We're past the point. I mean, especially due to early voting, we're past the point at which political speech makes much of a difference, in my opinion. Just because everybody's opinions are already decided. In a weird way, that's the thing. There were a couple of October surprises. I think late September, first with Trump getting sick, and then there's been this drip feed story of Hunter Biden's laptop. But it's questionable how much those actually changed. Whether or not those actually mattered. We might be in a space right now.
Yeah, I don't think they matter.
I don't know that. I don't know they do. That's the weird thing. People's opinions were already decided.
Yeah,
we could have been completely silent.
Because they say, okay, well, I heard people make the argument that, when the rape stuff came out, Me Too ended with Joe Biden, just pointing that out. When the Me Too stuff came out, they said, well, but so what if he's a rapist? I mean, Trump was a rapist. I mean, you're just talking about both have a rape. Okay, fair enough. Then, it's equal. And with everything else, I'll take this rapist. And it's like, what? It's like the rationalizing. The rationalizing was phenomenal. People honestly believe they're stuck with these two guys. And in some way they are, and some way they're not. And it's entirely conceptual. In odd terms, you know what I mean? It's a strange thing. At some point, what I hope is people really do pull themselves out of the Democratic Party and it says, I'm done with this. I mean, for God's sake, at some point you have to fight for the policies that you care about, and you have to be able to leave the party itself behind. I mean, it's not looking out for him. Brave in Atlanta. Stedman. I'm sorry, Stedman in Detroit. Stedman, what's going on?
Hey, so I'm. This is a comment from Ro from California on the call last Friday. So I'm going to make some assumptions because she's from California. She sounded like a white woman, and what she said about ADOS, and she ended her call saying, "Do ADOS want equality or freedom?" First, I'd like to say that's rich. I'm going to assume she's a feminist. I'm making all those assumptions about where she's from and what she sounded like. Do feminists want equality or freedom with white supremacy or with the patriarchy or with the U.S. empire? Why do we always expect black people to have to make these concessions, being the moral center, the moral compass, the moral authority for a corrupt, white supremacist, empirical nation? But also, it's kind of a false dichotomy. Can you have freedom without equality? And can you have equality without freedom? Again, I think it's rich for I'm going to assume feminists to question the self-determination of a formerly enslaved people. But then to also try to make this false choice of you have the option of equality or freedom with a failed state. Like that means anything for a person who would be totally fine to embrace patriarchy when it benefits her. It's just that kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
I feel you, Stedman. I
can tell. man. No real comment on that. I don't want to make any assumption, and I kind of don't want to talk smack about former callers, but it's up to you. That was your response, and thank you for the call, and thank you for telling us about it. In any event, we are still taking calls. I think we've got time for one more after this, 202-521-1320. Technically two more, but really I'm talking about Brave here, and if you want to call in and get on after Brave. Brave calling in from Atlanta. You're on. What's going on, man?
What's going on, guys? I feel the frustration from the last caller who just called in. I feel the exact same way. I was up until 5 this morning, recording my own audio in response to something that Ben Dixon is putting out. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Ben Dixon's show.
Yes, I remember Ben.
Yeah, what I don't get, and I don't know if this is more of a rant for me or a comment or a question. What I don't get is how are these people that were so in for Bernie and progressive movement and all these things who seem to have so much, because I've enjoyed his show and people like him. I've enjoyed their shows and their opinions, but how is it that people with so much insight and seem so intelligent, right, then put themselves in a position where they are now calling other black people who don't want to just surrender their vote for nothing, much less, or not so much less, alongside just regular voters on this side of the table, period, who don't want to just surrender their vote for anything. How are they then? How do they balance that, with their conscience? Whereas these guys were literally making the argument that people like Ice Cube and things, and people like myself who feel this way are rolling ourselves under that flag of patriarchy and white supremacy. But you leading your people to go and vote for a party that's done nothing for your people in ever, right? That's not supporting white supremacy. I don't understand that. Like I don't see how they qualify that at all. That's all I really want to say.
Thanks for the call, Brave. And look, I think part of it is fear. They're terrified. If we're, bringing it down to brass tacks, African Americans vote overwhelmingly Republican. Overwhelmingly Democrat. Almost in the DNA. And it's almost as if there is not another person on the ballot. And so he may be coming from that standpoint, where you're coming from a standpoint of, no, I'm not stuck with anybody. But, that's fair enough. We have one more caller, Pam from Arlington. Pam, 30 seconds.
Hi. One about there's a good documentary by Frontlines about the Syrian war, where they got to embed reporters with the so-called moderate rebels on one side of the river in the village they had conquered, and the Syrian army supporting civilians and officers on the other side. I don't remember what it's called. It came out a long time ago. I wanted to, my impetus for calling is I was following this thing at the CV early on in China, and I remember very clearly in March there was a super spreader event at the APAC convention. There were videos you could see on how the virus could spread through the air, especially inside a building like 15 feet. I have found one article looking from just early April saying CDC says COVID-19 can spread 13 feet. So I'm just saying, if you were paying attention, I dispute Shane's point of view that he expressed towards the beginning of the program. Okay?
That's what the World Health Organization, Pam, stick on for a second if you will, we've got time. That's what the World Health Organization said. I don't know what you're talking about. You're criticizing me, but that's literally what they said, and I was criticizing them for that too.
Well, there was some confusion at first. I'm looking at an article from April 14, 2020, CDC. It's on WebMD. COVID-19 can spread 13 feet, travel on shoes. So
absolutely, that's mid-April. I'm talking about March. I'm talking about the early period in March, and then it took a month plus for different outlets to update on that one.
On Zero Hedge, there were articles. I don't remember, but I remember it was at the time of the super spreader event that occurred at APAC, and there was a traced in large part to
totally. But Zero Hedge is not the establishment media. No, and I remember APAC too. I remember because Lee, my dad, went to that one. I was paying pretty close attention to that. And yeah. So here's my thing. I'm not saying that nobody was onto it. In fact, I was lucky enough to be clued into some people who were aware of what was actually going on. But the CDC, the World Health Organization, they got it wrong. They said that it was not airborne. And like Jamarl said, it's a sausage factory. Science is a sausage factory. But as long as we're going to be throwing around accusations about who got what wrong at what point and who killed how many people, as long as we're at that level, you should be able to criticize everyone. I criticize Trump. I've criticized Trump consistently on this for months, and I'm going to continue to criticize whoever does wrong, because frankly, that's how you repair your systems over time, is by, looking at them objectively and trying to improve upon them. But Pam, thank you for the call. Thank you for everybody for listening in. Thank you, engineer Andre, producers Cam and Raheem, and thank you, Jamarl Thomas, my co-host. We'll be back tomorrow at 7 a.m. Eastern, and I hope you'll be listening then. Until then, you've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Have a good day, folks.
Hey, Jamal.
Yes. Oh, damn it. Hey, yeah, I'm going to send it to you in like 10 minutes. Andre? All right, I'm sitting here like a maniac screaming Andre, so that's not going to work. All right.
Hey, Jamal.
Fault Lines, Thomas Stranahan, put another one in the books. I got to be honest, I am This is a rough day. Rough Thomas and Stranahan. Put it mildly. It's all right. I'm here. I am powered by the fact that we have an election tomorrow, even though I am, it's weird. It's a strange space to be in, headspace. I'm excited because I do news. And so it's like this distant thing to which I watch and doing news as if I'm not tethered to it. And yet I live here and I'm deflated by it. It's very strange. It's a very heady, weird effect. I'm going to end this. Like, share, and of course, subscribe.